The cornfields whispered that night, rustling like dry paper under a harvest moon. Pumpkins sat rotting on porches, their carved faces caving inward, candles still flickering behind glassy eyes. A low fog crept in from the river, winding between mailboxes and parked trucks, wrapping the whole town in a quiet, uneasy stillness. Somewhere, a porch swing moved on its own, slow, deliberate, creaking like the rhythm of a heartbeat. A dog barked once, then went silent. A radio played faintly in a kitchen window, "That'll Be the Day," drifting through the static before the signal cut to nothing but a hum. The telephone wires trembled in the wind, as though the town itself was trying to warn someone, anyone, before midnight came. And then, as the clock struck 9, the first scream echoed down Maple Street. No one ever figured out if it came from the living or the dead. Drawn to the dark tonight? Like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. Tonight, we're stepping back to 1955, to a night of masks, mischief, and fear, when one small-town Halloween revealed secrets no one was ever meant to hear. It started with the wind, a slow, restless sigh that moved through the trees and down the empty streets of Maple Hollow. At first, no one noticed. It was late October, and the nights always felt longer this time of year. The leaves had already turned brittle and red, and the scent of wood smoke clung to the air like memory. But this night was different. The wind didn't just move the branches, it seemed to breathe through them, circling the town like something alive and searching. Maple Hollow had always been a quiet place. Too quiet, some said. The kind of town where everyone waved but no one really talked. Where the same cars drove the same routes every morning, from the post office to the diner, from the school to the church, as if every day were a film reel being played over and over again. Nothing new ever happened there, not until the Halloween, when the clocks began to tick wrong. It began with the lights. They flickered just once, just long enough for everyone to notice. The televisions went blank, radios buzzed with static, and for a few seconds, every bulb in town dimmed to a heartbeat's pulse. Then, just as quickly, everything came back on. No one said much about it. Power lines were old, the sheriff said. The wind was high. But deep down, people knew it wasn't just a power surge. Because even after the lights returned, the darkness somehow stayed. Mrs. Howard, who ran the corner store, was the first to mention it. She told her husband that the street outside looked wrong. The shadows were thicker, the night heavier, and she swore she could see something moving at the edge of the parking lot. Not a person, not an animal, but something that moved when the wind didn't. Her husband laughed, said she'd been working too many shifts. But that night he locked the doors early. By morning the town seemed half awake. People moved slower, eyes glassy, voices flat. The milkman forgot 2 of his deliveries. The postman drove his route backward. At the diner, coffee cups clinked softly while no one spoke above a whisper. It was as if the whole town had stayed up too late, waiting for something that never came. And maybe they had, because the next night, the wind came again, harder this time, colder, whistling through every crack in every window frame. Curtains shifted in empty rooms. Porch swings creaked, though no one sat on them. Somewhere near the river, a dog barked once and then went silent, and above it all, the town clock in the square began to ring. Once, twice, 13 times. No one could explain it. The clock only went to 12. By the 3rd night, no one in Maple Hollow had slept. Not really. The babies cried without reason. The old men who dozed in their chairs woke gasping. Even the preacher said his dreams had gone dark, filled with faces he didn't recognize, standing in the fog outside the church doors. And still, no one left. Because where would they go? The highways out of town were fogged over, the road signs unreadable, and every car that tried to leave turned back around without knowing why. Maple Hollow had folded in on itself, the streets looping like a circle, the people trapped inside their own sleepless town. By Halloween night, the The town wasn't just tired. It was haunted, not by ghosts, but by the living who couldn't close their eyes. No one ever remembered when the last person truly slept again. Some said it was the power lines, others said it was the wind. But the old folks, the ones who remembered before the war, they said something else entirely, something they whispered behind drawn curtains when the night pressed too close to the glass. They said Maple Hollow had forgotten how to dream, and once a town forgets that, it never really wakes up again. By the second week of October, Maple Street had started to look like something out of a photograph left too long in the Sunday. The colors were there, faded reds, weak yellows, a sky the color of tin, but they felt worn thin, as if the town itself was beginning to rub away. Halloween decorations hung from porches like tired ghosts, paper skeletons, missing arms, pumpkins with collapsing grins, orange bulbs flickering half-heartedly in windows that hadn't been washed since summer. It was the kind of quiet only small towns could hold, not peaceful, but expectant. Every sound seemed to arrive from far away, the faint hum of a refrigerator, the squeal of a bicycle chain, a radio somewhere between stations. Even the crickets seemed to chirp slower here, as if they, too, were listening for something else beneath the silence. Around 8 p.m., a single streetlight began to hum. Its glow spilled weakly over the cracked asphalt, illuminating the white line down the middle of Maple Street, the same line kids followed every Halloween on their way to collect candy. But this year, no one was out. The houses were lit, the bowls of sweets still waiting by the doors, but the sidewalks were empty. Not a single costume rustled in the night. Sheriff Dillard's patrol car rolled slowly past the diner, its red lights off but its engine idling. He'd been doing that every night now, the same route, the same stretch of road, back and forth between the square and the high school. Folks said it was to keep an eye on things. Others whispered he was too afraid to go home. His wife said he'd stopped sleeping in their bed, that he sat in the living room with the radio on low, waiting for a call that never came. At the far end of Maple Street stood the Harlan house, a two-story clapboard with a porch that sagged in the middle, and a single porch swing that never stopped moving, even when the air was still. The Harlans had been gone for years, but no one had the heart to tear the place down. On certain nights, the neighbors claimed to see light coming from the upstairs window, soft, orange, flickering like candlelight. But when anyone tried to check, the door would not open. Tonight, the light was back. The wind carried the smell of damp earth and burning leaves. Somewhere down by the river, a fog was rising, curling around the mailboxes and creeping toward the street. It was so thick that when the sheriff's headlights passed through it, the beam fractured, scattering in every direction, revealing shapes that disappeared the moment they were seen. Across town, Mrs. Howard watched from her window. Her hands trembled against the curtain as she whispered to herself, "It's coming again." No one had asked what it was, not since the night her husband had vanished while locking up the store. She still left the porch light on for him, a habit that made the street glow unnaturally, as if her house alone remembered daylight. By midnight, the fog had swallowed the road entirely. The power flickered once, twice, and then steadied, but the light had changed. It wasn't white anymore. It was amber, soft and humming, the kind of light that didn't so much illuminate as watch. From the end of Maple Street came the faint echo of a voice, a child's, or something trying to sound like one. It called out a name, the same one the missing boy had whispered in his sleep before he disappeared. "Eddie, come back." The sound carried through the fog, bending between houses, brushing against the windows of every home. Curtains shifted, radios hissed, and one by one, porch lights began to turn off, until the street was dark again. Only the street light at the corner stayed on, humming softly in the wind, its glow trembling over the empty road where candy wrappers fluttered like leaves. And if you listened closely, you could hear it beneath the wind, beneath the hum, beneath the stillness, the faintest sound of footsteps walking slowly down Maple Street. But no one was there to see them. By the time October 27th rolled around, The general store's front display had begun to sag rows of rubber masks, wax lips, and paper skeleton garlands drooping from their strings. Every year, the town's kids would rush in after school to pick their Halloween costumes: cowboys, devils, spacemen, princesses. But this year, the masks didn't sell. They just hung there, staring out from behind the dusty glass, their painted smiles curling at the edges. Mr. Howard had ordered them from a catalogue out of Chicago, a box of 50, each with the same stamped tag that read, "Safe for all ages." But when he unpacked them, he said the smell wasn't right. It wasn't rubber or paint or paper glue. It was sweet, like spoiled fruit, with something metallic underneath. He aired them out in the back room, but the scent clung to the walls, like something that didn't want to leave. That's when the dreams started. Every night, he saw the masks hanging in rows, their hollow eyes following him through the dark. Sometimes they whispered, sometimes they laughed, and once he swore one of them moved. His wife told him to throw them out, but he couldn't. He said people had already paid for them, even if no one came to pick them up. By Halloween week, a few had sold mostly to kids who didn't care about the smell or the strange texture. The paper felt soft, almost warm, like skin that had been left too long in the Sunday. When the masks touched their faces, they seemed to stick for a moment before peeling away. One boy, Bobby Jenkins, said it made his ears ring when he took his off. That night, he left his mask on his dresser. In the morning, it was gone. His mother found the back door open and tiny footprints in the dew, too small for Bobby, too deep for an animal. She said she heard humming outside, the tune of some old lullaby she couldn't quite place. Across town, more masks began to vanish. One from the school gym's supply closet, two from the church's harvest display. Even the sheriff's daughter said hers disappeared from her closet, replaced by another she didn't recognize, same shape, but a different face. The new one wasn't smiling. By Thursday, the town's gossip spread faster than the wind. The preacher blamed the devil, the teacher blamed pranksters. But the older folks, the ones who'd been around before the war, said the masks weren't new at all. They'd seen them once before, decades ago, when the river froze solid and 3 families went missing. That night, Mr. Howard locked the store early. He covered the shelves, turned off the lights, and checked the door twice. But when he looked back one last time, he saw them, every mask turned in the same direction, staring straight at him through the glass. And though he couldn't hear anything over the ticking of the clock, he felt it a hum beneath the floorboards, low and steady, almost like breathing. By morning, the window display was empty. The hook swung gently in the air, tags scattered across the floor. And outside, lining the street from the store to the diner, were 50 paper masks, each one laid neatly in a row, eyes facing up, as if waiting for someone to pick them up and put them on. No one did. But that night, in the reflection of every darkened window, townsfolk swore they saw faces not their own, but those same paper smiles, floating just behind the glass. And if you listened closely, through the hum of the power lines and the whisper of the leaves, you could still hear the faint rustle of paper moving on its own. By the last weekend of October, the pumpkins began to vanish. One by one, they disappeared from porches, windowsills, and fence posts all over Maple Hollow. Some thought it was kids playing pranks, the kind of mischief that always came before Halloween. But others, the ones who stayed up late enough to hear the strange noises in the dark, whispered that it wasn't children at all. At first, it seemed harmless. Mrs. Langford woke one morning to find her jack-o'-lantern gone, the candle still warm where it had Saturday. The next night, the bakery's display pumpkins vanished too, 6 of them, all carved with neat, smiling faces that had greeted customers all month. The sheriff told everyone it was probably raccoons or teenagers. But raccoons don't carry pumpkins away without leaving a trail, and teenagers don't usually whistle old hymns while they do it. By Tuesday night, almost every porch in town was bare. Only one house still had a jack-o'-lantern, the Petersons down on Elm Street. Theirs was different. It wasn't orange but pale, nearly white, its face carved with careful precision, 3 triangles and a crescent grin. Mr. Peterson had found it growing behind his shed weeks earlier in a patch of soil he didn't remember planting. It had sprouted in perfect shape, smooth and round, and his wife said it was too beautiful to eat. The night before Halloween, that white pumpkin started to glow. Neighbors said they saw it from their windows, a faint light pulsing from within, though the candle inside had long since burned out. Some said it flickered like a heartbeat, others said it breathed, dimming and brightening in rhythm with the wind. Mr. Peterson took it inside to stop the gossip, but the light didn't fade. Instead, it grew stronger, illuminating the walls with an amber hue, like fire seen through fog. That same night, the sheriff's radio began to crackle again. The static rose and fell, whispering words he couldn't make out, something about harvest, something about light. He drove his route as usual, headlights sweeping past the empty porches and scattered candle stubs. When he reached Elm Street, he saw it. The Petersons' front door wide open, the white pumpkin sitting in the middle of the porch steps. It was carved differently now. The grin had stretched wider. The eyes were no longer triangles, but deep, uneven hollows that seemed to shimmer when his flashlight passed over them. He called out. No one answered. The air smelled of wax and something else, something sweet and rotten, like overripe fruit left in the sundae. The pumpkin's glow brightened, spilling across the yard and painting the grass gold. Then the light began to move, spreading in a slow ripple toward the fence line, seeping into the earth. By morning, the Petersons were gone. Their house was empty, breakfast still on the table. Only their footprints remained, small patches of grass pressed flat, leading from the front porch to the pumpkin patch behind the shed. There, in the middle of the dirt, the sheriff found new vines coiling through the soil, thick, pale, and pulsing faintly beneath the dawn light. That afternoon, when he returned to town, every missing pumpkin had reappeared. Each one sat perfectly centered on the same porches it had been taken from, but none of them looked the same. Their faces had changed. Their grins were sharper, their eyes deeper, their carved mouths open as though caught mid-breath. That night, as the wind rolled down from the hills, the candles inside each pumpkin flickered on all at once, in perfect unison. No one had lit them. And from the woods beyond the town limits came a faint rustling sound, like vines twisting through dry leaves, whispering to one another in a language the town had forgotten how to understand. It was Halloween Eve, 1955, the night before everything changed in Maple Hollow. The town smelled of damp leaves and cooling tar, the kind of air that makes sound travel too far. Streetlights hummed like tired bees, and every porch had its candle burning, hundreds of tiny flames fighting the dark. Somewhere near the edge of town, between the cornfield and the old churchyard, a boy named Eddie Price was last seen. He was 11, freckled, small for his age, the kind of kid who never went anywhere without his flashlight and his father's hand-me-down jacket. That evening, he'd been trick-or-treating with his best friend, Tommy Lyle. They hit every house on Maple Street, giggling through paper masks, stuffing their pillowcases full. By 9 o'clock, they had nearly filled them both. That's when Eddie said he knew a shortcut home through the cornfield, down by the fence behind Street Luke's. Tommy hesitated. Everyone knew that path was bad luck. Kids whispered that the ground there moved under your feet, that the rows of corn grew in circles instead of straight lines. But Eddie had laughed. He said ghosts weren't real, that grown-ups made up stories to keep kids from sneaking into the fields after dark. So Tommy watched his friend step between the stalks, flashlight beam bouncing once, twice, and then gone. He waited, called out, nothing. Just the sound of the wind rattling dry husks together, like bones clicking. By morning, Eddie Price was gone. The search lasted 3 days. The whole town turned out the sheriff, the church volunteers, even the high school football team. They combed through every row of corn, every ditch, every inch of the churchyard fence. Dogs barked and refused to go further past the scarecrow that stood in the center of the field, a crooked thing with a burlap face and a flannel shirt that flapped like wings in the wind. When the sheriff examined it, he noticed something odd. A flashlight tied around its wrist with twine, its beam still faintly glowing beneath the morning mist. He brought it back to the Price house that night. Eddie's mother screamed when she saw it, not because of the flashlight, but because of the shirt the scarecrow had been wearing. It was Eddie's. The coroner said the boy must have fallen into the river. Folks needed something to believe, and so they did. The town held a service, the church bells tolled, and by November the search was over. But Mrs. Price never stopped setting a place for him at the dinner table. She said she could still hear him on some nights, small feet on the porch, a knock on the back door, a voice whispering through the keyhole, "Mama, I found the way out." Others heard it too. The Lyle's dog began scratching at the windows, howling every night at the same hour Eddie vanished. The sheriff's radio picked up faint tapping, always in patterns of 5 long, short, short, long, long, the same rhythm as the boy's old flashlight. Then, on the first Halloween after his disappearance, someone found something in the corn again. Not bones, not clothes. Just a paper mask soaked through, half buried in the dirt, its mouth torn into a crooked smile. They say if you walk past that field after midnight, you can still see the flashlight beam moving between the rows, slow, steady, searching for a way home. But those who've gone looking for it never make it past the fence, because once you step into that corn, the rows behind you shift. The way back closes. And all that's left in the dark is the rustle of dry stalks and a boy's voice whispering softly through the wind, "Don't go this way." Sheriff Dillard had driven the same route every night for 20 years, from the diner on Main Street, past the church, then up toward the ridge, where the old water tower leaned into the sky like a rusted sentinel. Maple Hollow was the kind of town that didn't need much law, or at least that's what everyone liked to believe. Folks locked their doors more out of habit than fear, until that October, until the masks, the missing pumpkins, and the boy who never came home. By the time the first frost dusted the fields, Dillard had stopped sleeping altogether. He told his wife it was the job, but she knew better. He'd wake at midnight, sweating through his shirt, the sound of a child's voice still echoing in his head, not crying, just calling his name. The sheriff's car became his second home. He kept a thermos of coffee on the seat beside him, his shotgun propped up against the door, and the radio tuned to static. He claimed the hum kept the silence away. He'd start his rounds at dusk, when the last bit of orange light clung to the edge of the sky, and drive until dawn painted the fields grey again. That night, October 30th, the air was cold enough to bite. The moon hung low over the trees, swollen and yellow, like a bad omen. He turned off Maple Street and rolled slowly past the cornfield where they'd found the scarecrow wearing Eddie Price's shirt. The stalks swayed, though the wind had died. The radio crackled once, then went quiet. "Dispatch?" he said. Only static. Then, faintly, a voice, not his dispatcher, but something smaller. The sound of breathing. Then a whisper, "Right behind you." He slammed the brakes, twisting the wheel. Headlights cut through the fog, revealing nothing but the dirt road, lined with fence posts like crooked teeth. His hand hovered over the revolver at his belt, but he didn't draw. He knew better than to shoot at shadows. Instead, he stepped out of the car. The gravel crunched under his boots. He could hear the engine idling, the faint hiss of the radio still alive inside. The fog moved strangely, not drifting but circling. He could smell damp soil, metal, and something sweet, like candle wax. 100 feet ahead, something flickered, a small light bobbing through the corn, too steady for fire, too warm for a flashlight. It glowed orange, pulsing softly with each step it took closer. "Eddie?" Dillard said before he could stop himself. His voice trembled in the cold. The light paused. Then the radio in his car flared to life. The same whisper came through, louder this time, layered not one voice but many. "He's still out here, Sheriff." He ran back toward the car, breath clouding in the air, fingers fumbling with the door handle. When he looked up through the windshield, the light was gone. Only the fog remained and his reflection staring back at him in the glass, pale and hollow-eyed, as if he hadn't been sleeping for 100 years. When he got home just before dawn, his wife met him at the door. She said he smelled like dirt and smoke and asked why there was mud on the passenger seat. He didn't answer. But later, when the morning sun broke over Maple Hollow, the sheriff's cruiser sat parked outside the station, engine cold, radio still whispering faintly to itself. The dispatcher swore she heard someone else speaking through it, a child's laughter, quiet and distant, fading just as she picked up the receiver. That afternoon, Sheriff Dillard handed in his badge, said he was done patrolling nights, said the roads had started to loop on him, that no matter where he turned, he kept ending up at the same cornfield. When the deputy asked what he'd seen out there, he only said one thing before walking away for good. Some roads don't lead anywhere, they just wait for you to come back. The people of Maple Hollow were God-fearing folk, or at least they used to be. On Sundays, the pews at Street Luke's overflowed. The air inside always smelled of wax and hymn books, the kind of scent that felt older than sin itself. But after Eddie Price disappeared, attendance began to thin. By the time Halloween came, half the congregation stayed home. The others came not to pray but to listen, because ever since that night, the church bell had started to ring. It was a heavy, iron thing that hadn't been touched in years. The old priest, Father Callahan, had ordered it sealed after a lightning strike cracked its frame during the war. "It's cursed metal," he used to say. "It calls to the wrong kind of ears." But sometime in mid-October, it began to toll again, not at noon or morning mass, but exactly at midnight. The first time it happened, folks thought it was the wind. Then it rang again the next night, and the next, always 12 times, always slow, always hollow. Father Callahan tried to dismiss it, said the wind must be pulling at the rope, but when he climbed the bell tower to check, the rope wasn't moving, the bell was. He came down pale as salt, told his altar boys to lock the doors, told the sheriff to keep folks away after dark. But Maple Hollow was small, and fear always drew a crowd. People started gathering near the churchyard just before midnight, standing behind the wrought iron fence, their breath silver in the cold. On the 5th night, the bell didn't just ring 12 times, it rang 13. They said the sound changed too. It wasn't iron anymore, it was a voice, deep and slow, rolling through the fog like thunder underwater. Some claimed they could hear their own names in the echo. Others swore the sound came from beneath the church, not above it. When morning came, the altar candles had all burned out. The front doors hung open, and Father Callahan was gone. The sheriff found his coat folded neatly over the front pew, his Bible open to the book of Job. But the page was blank, the ink gone, the words erased as if they had never existed. Only one thing was written in pencil across the margin: "It's not the wind that calls it." By the next evening, the bell had gone silent again. The townsfolk thought it was over, but at exactly midnight, every clock in Maple Hollow stopped. The hands froze at 12, and the air inside every house grew heavy, as though something unseen had leaned close to listen. A few minutes later, the bell rang once, just once, and the sound didn't fade. It lingered, low and constant, until it was impossible to tell whether it was still ringing or if the world itself had started to hum. That's when the church windows began to glow. Not from candlelight, not from the moon, but from something inside, a faint pulsing light like the ember of a dying fire. Shapes moved across it, dark and slow, like shadows cast from the other side of the glass. No one went in after that. The doors stayed locked. The priest's name was carved into the bell tower the next morning, though no one had done it. Years later, they'd say you could still hear the 13th toll on cold October nights, a deep, hollow note rolling down Maple Street, rattling the glass of sleeping houses. And if you stood too close to Street Luke's when it happened, you'd swear you could feel the sound inside your bones, as if something below the floorboards was trying to climb its way back up. Every town has one the house people cross the street to avoid. In Maple Hollow, that house sat at the far end of Sycamore Lane, where the pavement gave way to dirt and the telephone wires stopped humming. The locals called it the Givens place, though the Givens family had been gone for over a decade. They left in '44, the night the eldest son came home from the war. He was different, they said, quiet, pale, eyes always fixed on the tree line. He'd sit on the porch all night, smoking one cigarette after another, staring at nothing. Then, one morning, the whole family was gone. Coffee still warm on the kitchen table. Front door open. No note. Just gone. The house was boarded up after that. Windows nailed shut, doors sealed with planks that turned grey over time, but the locals swore they could still see the curtains move, even with the boards nailed tight. The wind never touched them, yet they shifted slow, like someone breathing behind them. By 1955, the Givens house had become a story parents told their kids to keep them in line. Stay out of Sycamore Lane, they'd say. That house remembers names. No one questioned what that meant. On the evening of October 30th, a group of teenagers decided to test it. They brought flashlights, cigarettes, and the kind of courage only the young can fake. The sheriff's warnings, the church bell, the missing boy, all of it just small-town nonsense to them. They wanted to see the ghost of the Givens family for themselves. They reached the end of Sycamore just as the fog began to roll in. The air turned cold enough to sting their throats. The house loomed through the mist, tall, black, half swallowed by vines that looked more like veins than roots. The front porch sagged, its swing creaking gently back and forth. The first boy to step up, Charlie Benton, said he could hear something moving inside. A slow shuffle, like bare feet dragging across the floorboards. When he pressed his ear to the door, the sound stopped. Then, softly, something knocked back 3 times. He laughed it off, said it was just the wood settling, and pushed the door open. It shouldn't have opened at all. The boards were still nailed across the frame, but they splintered with a sound like splitting bone. Inside, the air was warm, not stale, not dusty warm. The wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips, and the floor was littered with old newspapers dated the 31st of October 1944. Headlines about the war, photographs of smiling soldiers. One article circled in pencil read, "Local boy returns home from Pacific." Someone had written in the margin, "Not him." The others said they didn't feel right, that the walls seemed to breathe. One girl swore she saw something move up the staircase, a figure, tall and thin, pausing at the landing as if listening. But when Charlie raised his flashlight, there was no one there, just a set of footprints leading upward, bare and blackened with soot. The group ran. Only one of them looked back. She said the porch light had come on faint, flickering, like a candle inside a jar. In the window above the door, she swore she saw the silhouette of a woman, her hand pressed against the glass. The handprint was still there the next morning, though the inside of the house was thick with dust. A week later, the sheriff found Charlie's flashlight lying in the grass near the porch. The batteries were dead, but when he turned it over, there was a name carved into the handle, his own. That same night, a light appeared again in the upstairs window of the Givens house. It's still there, they say, faint and steady, like a lantern waiting for someone to come home. But no one ever does. For as long as anyone could remember, someone had seen her pale as frost, framed by the cracked glass of the Givens house on Sycamore Lane. Some said she appeared only when the moon was full. Others swore they saw her in broad daylight, staring through the lace curtains like a woman waiting for a visitor who never came. It started after the teenagers broke in that October. People whispered that they'd stirred something that had been content to sleep. Mrs. Langford, who lived 2 houses down, was the first to claim she saw her. Said she woke one night to close her shutters and caught a glimpse of a face upstairs, grey and still, with eyes too dark to reflect the porch light. She thought it was her imagination. But the next night, it was there again, the same figure, same window, unmoving. Only this time, when she drew the curtain back, the woman lifted her hand and waved. Word spread fast, like rot under floorboards. Soon, kids dared each other to walk down Sycamore after sunset. Some claimed to see her, some didn't. But everyone who did came back changed, quiet, pale, and oddly forgetful, like they'd left something of themselves behind. Sheriff Dillard didn't believe a word of it. Not after the mess of the cornfield, not after the church bell. He drove out there himself just past midnight. The road was slick with dew, and the fog came in waves that shimmered in his headlights. When he reached the Givens house, he killed the engine and sat a moment, letting the silence settle. At first, there was nothing, just the hum of insects, the whisper of the wind through the trees. Then, a soft sound tapping, slow, rhythmic, like fingernails on glass. He turned his flashlight toward the house, sweeping the beam across the porch, up the siding, over the warped shingles. And then he saw it. A woman standing behind the second-story window. Her hair hung long and stringy, her dress white and thin as paper. But her face, it wasn't right. The features were blurred, like wet paint. And where her eyes should have been, the glass seemed to ripple. The sheriff froze. The woman raised her hand and pressed it against the pane. The outline of her palm spread across the glass, leaving behind a smear of dark, glistening residue. He blinked, and she was gone. He climbed the porch steps, heart pounding, and tried the front door. Locked. He circled around the back and found a basement window cracked open, curtains fluttering like breath. Inside, the air smelled of dust and damp wood and something else, faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. The living room was empty. Wallpaper sagged, and the floor groaned under his boots. He moved room by room until he reached the staircase. The steps were cold. The higher he climbed, the colder the air became, until he could see his breath fog in the beam of his flashlight. At the top of the stairs, he turned left and stopped. There was a window at the end of the hall, the same one he'd seen from outside, and standing before it was a figure facing away, shoulders shaking gently, as though sobbing without sound. "Ma'am?" he called out. His voice came out small, swallowed by the stillness. The figure turned. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth, pale skin where a face should have been. A faint outline of features pressed beneath it, shifting slowly as though something underneath was trying to break through. The sheriff dropped his flashlight. The beam rolled across the floor, illuminating the wallpaper, and for just a second he saw that it was covered in faces, drawn crudely in ash, each one staring outward, mouths open in silent screams. He ran. The next morning, his cruiser was found at the edge of Sycamore Lane, lights still on, driver's door open. The keys lay in the dirt, slick with dew. That night, the woman appeared again. Only now, she stood in a different window, the downstairs one, her blurred face turned toward the road, waiting for the next visitor to stop and look back. Some say she's still there, watching anyone who slows their car to stare. Others say she's moved on. But on cold October nights, when the fog drifts low and the moon catches the glass just right, you can still see her handprint on that window, faint, but there, as though she never really left the house at all. By Halloween morning, Maple Hollow looked like a photograph half-burned at the edges. The fog hadn't lifted in 3 days. School was closed, the streets empty, the diner lights still flickering, though no one had opened since the sheriff's disappearance. The only thing left moving through town were the leaves and the candy wrappers. They showed up first on Elm Street, just one or two at a time, fluttering against the curbs, caught in the wet wind. But by mid-morning, they were everywhere. Silver foil, orange paper, crumpled wax littering porches, stuck to fences, caught in the branches of trees. No one knew where they came from. The store was closed, the candy stands were empty, and yet the wrappers kept multiplying, as if they'd been dropped by invisible hands. At first, people swept them up, thinking it was kids or the wind, but every time someone cleaned their yard, more appeared overnight. And not the same ones. These were torn, chewed, damp with dew. Some were stuck together with something thick and sweet, like sap or blood. Mrs. Langford, whose husband was still missing from the corn search, gathered a handful to burn in her fireplace. The moment the paper caught flame, it released a smell that wasn't sugar or wax. It was something rotten, something that made her eyes water and her stomach twist. When the smoke cleared, the wrappers were gone, but the ash wasn't grey. It was red. By noon, the school janitor found them inside the building, scattered down the hallway, leading from the front door to the basement stairs. He followed them down, one by one, until the light overhead began to flicker. The last wrapper lay at the bottom step, pressed flat against the floor. He bent to pick it up. It was warm. When he turned it over, he saw something scrawled on the inside, a word written in shaky, childlike letters. Eddie. He dropped it and ran. By the time the deputy arrived, the hallway was clean, not a single piece of paper anywhere, but the smell lingered, sweet, metallic, and wrong. That night, more wrappers appeared, now forming trails down every street. They led from house to house, across the square, up to the doors of the church, and finally out toward the river. The water glowed faintly beneath the fog, reflecting something orange that pulsed beneath its surface. A group of men followed the trail with flashlights, whispering prayers under their breath. The candy wrappers crunched underfoot, sticky enough to cling to their boots. When they reached the riverbank, they stopped. There, caught between the reeds, floated hundreds of wrappers, folded neatly, end to end, forming the shape of a long, winding line that disappeared into the dark water. One of the men, a machinist named Victor Hale, waded in to pull them free. The moment he touched the water, the wrappers moved. They unfurled like leaves in the current, spreading out and swirling around him. Then he screamed. The others pulled him out, shaking and pale. His hands were covered in small red welts, as though bitten by something too small to see. When they examined him later, the marks had begun to blister in the shape of letters. They spelled hollow. ITP. By morning, the river had gone still again, the wrappers were gone, but the current ran strange that day backward, some said, and the fish washed up along the banks, bellies full of paper and foil. That Halloween night, when the wind began to rise and the power lines started to hum, the candy wrappers returned. They say they still find them, sometimes years later, caught under the roots of old trees, torn and faded but unmistakable. The foil catches the light just right, and for a split second you can see something reflected in it, not your face, but a hollow-eyed smile, staring back. The first frost of November came early that year, settling over Maple Hollow like ash. The town was quiet again, but not peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that listens back. People spoke in low tones, doors stayed locked, and the wind seemed to carry whispers that never quite faded. That's when the veteran came home. His name was George Mallory. Folks remembered him from before the war, the tall boy who used to fix radios and play trumpet at the Sunday socials. He left in '44 and didn't return until a full decade later, stepping off the Greyhound with a limp and a suitcase that rattled when he moved it. No one asked what was inside. He rented a small room above the hardware store and kept mostly to himself. The only time people saw him was at the diner, where he'd sit in the corner booth long after closing, staring at the fog beyond the glass. Sometimes he'd talk to himself, quiet, steady words no one could make out. When the waitress asked if he was all right, he only smiled and said, "It's quieter here than it used to be." The first person he opened up to was old Mr. Howard, the store owner. He'd been in the same regiment once, long before arthritis turned his hands to stone. One night, George stopped by after hours, clutching that battered suitcase. He asked for a padlock, the strongest one they had. "What's in there?" Howard asked. "Something that came back with me," George said. "Something that doesn't sleep." Howard laughed, thinking it was a joke. But when George looked up, his eyes were pale and flat, like moonlight through dirty water. That night, the power went out again across half of town. When it came back, folks swore they heard a noise, not thunder, but a single metallic clang echoing from somewhere near the river. The next morning, The deputy found George sitting by the bridge, suitcase beside him, eyes fixed on the water. Inside, the locks were snapped clean open, as if by heat or pressure. When the deputy asked what happened, George said, "I tried to send it back, it doesn't want to go." Over the next few days, people began seeing him at odd hours standing outside the church at midnight, or walking down Maple Street with his head tilted as though listening for something underground. He told the grocer he couldn't bear the sound of the wind anymore, that it whispered names he knew from overseas, names of men buried in foreign soil. One night, Mrs. Langford heard trumpet music drifting through the fog, faint, mournful, not from any record. The melody was broken, wrong somehow, full of notes that didn't belong. It came from Sycamore Lane. The next morning, George's room was empty, the bed unmade, the suitcase gone. But the window was wide open, and the sill was covered in soot, as though something had burned there. Down by the river, where the ice was just beginning to form, the deputy found the suitcase half sunk in the mud, lid cracked open. Inside were scraps of paper, each one with a word written in trembling ink: "Stay, listen, return." And at the bottom, wrapped carefully in cloth, was a mask, one of those same paper ones from Mr. Howard's store, only this one was different. It had been painted grey, the edges charred, and across its forehead, in black scrawl, were 3 words: "They came back." When the deputy brought it to the station, it began to hum low, almost too quiet to hear. He locked it in the evidence drawer, but by morning the sound had spread through the walls. No one ever saw George Mallory again. But some nights, when the fog rolls in heavy from the river, folks still hear the trumpet, one long note, held too long, echoing through the hollow like a warning that never ends. The first snow came early that year, thin flakes that melted before they touched the ground, leaving behind only a damp cold that sank into the bones. The town's radios crackled all through November. It wasn't the usual hum of poor reception. It was different, like someone whispering between the frequencies, too low to understand, too close to ignore. At first, folks blamed the weather. Then they blamed the towers. But down on Birch Avenue, a 14-year-old girl named Annie Caldwell said she could hear the voices clearly. Annie's father ran the post office, and her mother taught piano at the school before it closed for the season. Annie spent most evenings in her attic, twisting the dial of a battered Philco radio her father had repaired for her birthday. It was her favorite sound, the low hiss of static and the soft glow of the orange dial against the dark. Then one night, the radio spoke. At first it was faint, buried under static, like wind caught inside a bottle. Then, through the crackle, came words slow, broken, trembling with distance. "Annie, come closer." She froze. The voice was soft and familiar, her mother's. But her mother was asleep downstairs. The next night, she listened again. At first, only silence. Then a different voice, younger, breathless. A boy's. "Don't listen to them," it said. "They're not done yet." From that night on, the voices came every evening, always after midnight, always from the same frequency, 97.3 on the dial, though the station didn't exist on any list. Sometimes she heard laughter, sometimes the distant toll of the church bell, and sometimes she heard her own name, repeated until it stopped sounding like a name at all. When she told her parents, they brushed it off as imagination. The next morning, the radio was gone, taken by her father, and locked in the post office storage room, but that night, she still heard it. Not from the attic this time, but from the air itself, faint, humming through the radiator, whispering from the walls. The sound followed her to school. In the hallways, in the library, even in the silence of the empty classrooms, she could hear words crawling just beneath hearing. She stopped sleeping, stopped speaking. Her classmates said she hummed sometimes, a thin tune that no one recognized. By the 3rd week of November, Annie vanished. Her father found the attic window open, frost gathered on the sill. On her desk sat a notebook filled with lines written over and over in pencil, the same phrase, "I hear them under the river." The sheriff, a new one, young and eager, went down to the post office to search the storage room. The Philco was still there, but when he switched it on, it played a recording. A girl's voice, clear as day, whispering, "Tell them to stop ringing the bell." The deputy who heard it claimed the radio stayed warm long after it was unplugged. A week later, a group of boys skipping rocks by the river said they found a shoe near the bend. It was small, lined with wool, the kind Annie always wore. Inside, it was a piece of paper torn from her notebook. The writing was shaky but legible. They're not in the air anymore. They're in the wires. After that, no one in Maple Hollow kept their radios on past dusk. Some threw them out entirely. Others covered them with cloth, as though that could muffle whatever was trying to speak through them. Still, when the wind blew in from the water and the fog rolled over the bridge, every radio in town would hum for just a moment the briefest flicker of sound between stations. And if you listened closely, you could still make out a voice small, certain, and far too close. "I can still hear you." For as long as anyone in Maple Hollow could remember, the hayride had been the town's one unbroken tradition. Every Halloween, families would gather by Miller's farm at sundown, where the tractor lights cut through the mist and the fields smelled of smoke, cider, and straw. It was supposed to be simple laughter, stories, the sound of tires crunching gravel. But that year, the air felt wrong. The fog was thicker than usual. It clung to the trees in long, thin strands, and even the lanterns hanging from the wagon poles struggled to push it back. Still, people showed up. Farmers, kids, the preacher's wife, the high schoolers with their paper masks and thermoses of something they weren't old enough to drink. Old Man Miller stood at the gate, chewing tobacco and staring at the tree line. "Don't go past the creek," he said. "The horses spook easy this year." He said it twice, like he wasn't talking to them, but to something listening in the dark. The first half of the ride was fine. The tractor chugged along the familiar loop, and folks told ghost stories to pass the time. But when they reached the far edge of the cornfield, the driver, a quiet man named Earl, slowed the engine. "Road's different tonight," he muttered. The path that should have circled back toward town now sloped down into a hollow no one recognized. No one spoke, but no one stopped him either. The fog deepened, the trees grew taller, their branches thick with frost. The lanterns flickered, and the horses began to stamp and snort. Someone joked that the route must have changed. Someone else said, "We've been driving for an hour," but Earl swore it had been 15 minutes. Then they saw the lights. At first, they looked like fireflies, faint, orange glimmers drifting between the trees. But they moved too slow, and they didn't blink. They hovered, floating above the ground in pairs, like the eyes of something watching from the mist. A child started crying. The preacher's wife began to pray under her breath. Earl turned the tractor wheel, hard, trying to find the road back. But the path was gone, swallowed by fog. When he looked behind them, the trail of wagon ruts had vanished. The horses screamed then, a high, broken sound that made everyone on the wagon go silent. The lanterns went out. For a moment, the world was nothing but blackness and breath. When the lights came back on, half the wagon was empty. No one had heard footsteps. No one had seen anyone move. The straw was undisturbed, as if those who vanished had simply stepped out of existence. The only sound was the wind moving through the corn, or what they thought was corn. The stalks were taller now, pale, and glistening like they were made of wax. Earl didn't wait. He cracked the reins, turned the tractor around, and drove as fast as it would go. The engine roared, the wheels bounced over stones, and for a while it felt like the fog was chasing them, pushing against their backs, filling their lungs. When they finally broke through the tree line and back into familiar ground, the first thing they saw was Miller's barn light glowing faintly through the haze. The second thing was the clock on the tractor. It read 3:12 a.m. They'd left at dusk. When morning came, the missing were gone for good. The sheriff's deputies searched the field and found nothing but broken lanterns and a trail of candy wrappers leading toward the hollow. The hayride was never held again. But sometimes, on the last nights of October, folks driving past Miller's farm swear they can still see wagon lights moving through the fog, slow, rhythmic, circling the field that no longer has a road. If you stop your car and listen, you can hear them too, laughter, soft at first, then distant, then gone. And sometimes, beneath it, a voice, "Don't go past the creek." Maple Hollow's school sat on a hill that had been scraped bare long before anyone could remember. The old folks said the land was hollow beneath, full of limestone, roots, and something else the builders hadn't wanted to talk about. The cornerstone, laid back in 1909, carried no date, no inscription, just a single carved symbol that no one could ever quite identify, half circle, half eye. By 1955, the school had begun to sag. The floors creaked, the boiler hissed, and the basement flooded every spring. The janitor, a quiet man named Lester Hall, was the only one who didn't mind staying late. He liked the silence, said he'd grown used to it after the war. But that autumn, even Lester started to feel uneasy. The lights in the hallways began to flicker, and the clocks never agreed on the time. When he swept the gym floor, he could hear faint tapping from below, not pipes, not rats, slower, heavier, like someone knocking back. One night, a fuse blew during a storm, and Lester went down to the basement to fix it. The floor was slick with standing water, and the smell of wet dust filled the air. He followed the humming of the fuse box to the far wall and found something he'd never seen before. A metal door half buried behind old desks and broken chairs. No handle, just a rusted hinge and a latch sealed with wax. The wax wasn't new. It was cracked, flaking at the edges and stamped with that same strange symbol from the cornerstone. He fetched a crowbar and pried it open. Behind the door was a staircase, narrow, concrete, leading down into the dark. The air that came out was cold and dry, too dry for a flooded basement. He shined his flashlight and saw carvings on the walls. Not words, but spirals, handprints, and faces drawn in what looked like soot. Some of the handprints were small, like children's. The stairs ended in a room barely larger than a classroom closet. In the center sat a desk, old and warped, with papers scattered across it. They were lesson plans, arithmetic, geography, dated 1910, the year after the school was built. Beneath them was a ledger written in tight, slanted script. It listed names, student names, each marked with a grade, a note, and a date of death. At the bottom of the page was a single line, scrawled in darker ink. Returned beneath, lesson complete. Lester slammed the ledger shut. The air shifted, the faintest whisper of movement behind him. He turned his flashlight toward the stairs, and for a split second he saw them. Faint shapes standing just beyond the beam's edge. Small, unmoving, watching. He bolted, taking the steps two at a time, slamming the door shut behind him. When he reached the fuse box, the lights flickered back on by themselves. Everything was quiet again. Too quiet. The next morning, when the principal arrived, the janitor's mop bucket sat by the door, still full. His keys were on the desk, but Lester was gone. No one believed the story, not until the floorboards in room 12 began to bow, and the children started complaining of voices under the desks. The teachers said it was nonsense, the building settling. But when they moved the desks to repair the flooring, they found faint chalk drawings etched into the planks, stick figures holding hands, arranged in a circle, each with an X drawn over the head. They covered the carvings with new wood, painted over them, tried to forget. The school closed 2 winters later for structural concerns. They were splaking. Now it sits boarded up, grass growing through the cracks in the playground, the bell tower leaning slightly east. On foggy nights, when the wind shifts from the river, you can still hear the faint sound of chalk dragging across wood, drawing, erasing, drawing again. And if you stand close enough to the boarded windows, you'll hear what the children swore they heard before the doors were locked for good. A whisper from the floor beneath your feet, asking softly, "Is it time for recess yet?" The fog had settled thick over Maple Hollow that night, wrapping the town in a grey silence so deep it made even neon lights look tired. The only place still open was Penny's Diner, a squat silver building at the edge of Main Street, its sign buzzing faintly like a dying insect. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and fried onions clung to the air. It was a little past midnight when the stranger walked in. The waitress, Dottie Graves, was refilling the sugar jars. She said later she never heard the door open, just looked up, and he was there, standing by the counter. Tall, thin, wearing a black overcoat that looked older than the town itself. His hat dripped with fog. He carried no suitcase, no gloves, just a cigarette tucked behind one ear and a newspaper folded under his arm. "Coffee," he said. His voice was calm, low, too low. Dottie nodded, poured him a cup. The liquid hit the mug like ink, black and slow. "You passing through?" she asked. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You could say that. He never gave his name. He didn't touch his coffee, just let the steam rise between his fingers. The other late-night regulars, the milk truck driver, the school custodian, two farmers too stubborn to sleep, stopped talking after a while. They said it wasn't what he said that made them uneasy. It was what he didn't. Every time the clock above the jukebox ticked, he seemed to listen, head tilting slightly, like the sound meant something only he could hear. After 10 minutes of silence, he spoke. "You folks hear it yet?" No one answered. "The ringing," he said, and smiled again. "It's getting closer." Dottie tried to laugh. "You mean the church bell? That's a good mile from here." He shook his head slowly. "Not that one." Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped in wax paper. He set it on the counter. The paper crinkled, stained with something dark. "Found this on the road," he said. Dottie peeled the edge back. Inside was a candy wrapper, torn, half melted, and folded into the shape of a cross. "Where'd you?" she started, but he interrupted. "They're using them now," he said, still smiling. "For the marking." The air seemed to thicken around him. The fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing louder. Outside, the fog pressed against the glass like hands. Then the power went out. When the lights returned a few seconds later, the stranger was gone. His stool was empty. The door hadn't opened. The bell above it hadn't chimed. But his coffee cup was still steaming and the folded newspaper lay on the counter where he'd Saturday. Dottie reached for it, but it wasn't a newspaper. It was a stack of old photographs. Grainy, black and white, the town square, the church, the cornfield. All taken decades apart, but in every picture, the same man stood in the background. Same hat, same coat, same faint smile. The sheriff's deputy took the photos later that morning. When he turned the last one over, something was written on the back in smeared pencil. "He always comes before the fog." By sunrise, the fog had swallowed Main Street completely. Penny's Diner stayed closed for 2 days. When Dottie finally returned, she found the coffee pot still warm and the stranger's hat hanging on the coat rack, dripping river water onto the tile. No one ever saw him again. But sometimes, when the fog rolls in heavy and the power lines start to hum, people swear they see him sitting at the counter through the window, hands folded, waiting for his coffee. And if you look too long, the lights inside flicker once, twice, and the bell above the door rings all on its own. By the first week of November, Maple Hollow was papered with faces. Every telephone pole, every storefront, every mailbox wore a notice missing printed in bold black letters. The paper edges curled in the damp, and the rain blurred the ink until the names began to fade. At first, it was just a handful: Eddie Price, the sheriff, a few of the kids from the hayride. But by the end of the week, there were dozens. Whole families, the Petersons, the Langfords, the old woman who lived near the river. Their cars still sat in driveways, their coffee cups still half full. It was as if the town itself had blinked, and people had vanished between seconds. The posters weren't official. No one printed them at the post office, and the new deputy swore he hadn't authorized a thing. But every morning, more appeared, neatly typed, perfectly centered. pinned with a single rusted nail. The strangest part wasn't that the missing posters multiplied, it was that they changed. The first night they went up, they were ordinary black and white photos, dates, descriptions. By the second night, the faces were different. The smiles had warped, eyes darker, skin grainier. By the third, some of the posters no longer had names, just the words "still here" typed where the names should be. And then the posters started appearing inside. Mrs. Callahan, the priest's sister, found one taped to her bathroom mirror. It was her husband's face, but the photo was from the night before, wearing the same shirt he'd fallen asleep in. He was sitting at the kitchen table in the picture, coffee cup in hand, looking straight at the camera. But when she rushed downstairs, the table was empty, and the coffee was still steaming. The next day, she was gone too. Down at Penny's diner, Dottie discovered a poster taped to the inside of the window facing Main Street. It showed the interior of the diner, her counter, the stools, the pie case, but empty. No customers. No her. No lights. Just fog pressing against the glass, and a figure standing at the far end of the room, its face turned toward the door. When she tore it down, the tape stuck to her fingers. The ink bled into her skin, black and cold. It took 3 days for the stain to fade, but the shape of the letters never fully disappeared. That night, the wind picked up. The posters rippled against the poles, snapping in the gusts like brittle wings. From a distance, it sounded almost like whispering dozens of paper voices fluttering at once. The next morning, the deputy woke to find the station walls covered in them. His own photo repeated over and over, same hat, same badge, same blank stare. But in each one, the date beneath his name changed. Tomorrow's date, the day after that. Then a week ahead. He burned them all in the metal waste bin out back, watched the smoke twist into the fog and disappear. For a moment, he thought he saw shapes moving in the haze, silhouettes stepping forward. One by one, faces turned toward him. But when the wind shifted, there was nothing. By nightfall, every poster in town had vanished. The poles were bare, the storefronts clean. Only the nails remained, hundreds of them gleaming faintly in the streetlight, all hammered in at the exact same height. And though the posters were gone, people still swore they saw faces staring out from the wood-grain faint outlines that changed when the light hit just right. They say if you walk Main Street after midnight, you can hear it. The faint rustle of paper against wood, like something trying to unpin itself. And if you stop long enough to listen, sometimes you'll find a single sheet lying at your feet, warm to the touch, your name already printed at the top. The snow came sudden, not in soft flakes, but in hard, dry gusts that rattled windows and made the whole town sound hollow. People said it was too early in the season for that kind of cold, but Maple Hollow hadn't been normal for a long time. The fog still hung low, clinging to fences, pooling in the hollows between houses. The town had learned not to look too closely at things, not to ask, not to notice. Until that morning, Mrs. Alden was the first to see it. She lived alone in the small yellow house near the square, and every morning she swept her porch before the sun came up. But when she opened her door that day, she found something waiting for her. A trail of dark, wet footprints leading up her steps. Bare footprints, too small for a grown man, too wide for a child. At the top step, just below the doormat, the footprints ended. In their place was a single, dark stain, thick, still glistening, spreading across the wood grain like it was alive. Blood. The sheriff's deputy, the same one who'd burned the posters, came to take a look. He'd seen plenty of strange things that season, but this one made his stomach twist. The snow around the steps wasn't disturbed. No other footprints, no drag marks, no sign anyone had come or gone, just that one trail ending neatly at her door. He took a sample and drove it out to the next county, to a lab that still answered his calls. When the results came back, the report was blank except for one line scrawled across the bottom: human multiple donors. That night, Mrs. Alden tried to scrub the stain away. She poured boiling water, bleach, lye, but the blood wouldn't fade. Instead, it darkened, sinking deeper into the wood. By morning, the shape had changed. It no longer looked like a spill. It looked like a handprint. Neighbors stopped coming by. The mailman left letters at the edge of the walk. The deputy drove past more often, slowing just enough to glance at the porch, then speeding up again. By the third day, the stain had spread across the entire threshold. Then came the knocking. It started around midnight, 3 short raps on the front door. Mrs. Alden called out, thinking it was the deputy. No answer. When she opened the door, no one was there. Just fog, curling around her feet, like smoke. The next night, it came again, louder this time. 3 knocks, then silence. She pressed her ear to the wood and thought she heard breathing on the other side. Slow, steady, close. By dawn, the handprint had changed again. The fingers were longer now, curling toward the inside of the house. The next night, the knocking came from inside the walls. When the deputy arrived the next morning, the door was open. The trail of footprints now led away from the house, winding down the street toward the churchyard. Mrs. Alden was gone. They found her broom propped neatly against the railing, bristles still damp with melted snow. Her front steps were bare, not a drop of blood left. Only the faint outline of that handprint burned into the wood as though pressed by heat. The deputy followed the trail as far as he could down the hill, past the square, all the way to Street Luke's. It ended at the church doors. And there, on the stone threshold, was another stain, darker than before, shaped exactly like the one on Mrs. Alden's porch. That night, the church bell rang once low and hollow, though the ropes had long since been cut. By morning, frost had sealed the doors shut. And if you go there now, on a still November night, you can still see the marks, not red anymore, but black, sunk deep into the stone. Some say they're handprints. Others say there's something else, not reaching in, but reaching out. The posters appeared overnight. Bright colors against the gray November sky, red, yellow, blue stapled to telephone poles, fences, and the windows of closed shops. Halloween Carnival, one night only, Maple Hollow Fairgrounds. No one knew who printed them or why they appeared after Halloween had already passed, but the paper looked new and the ink smelled fresh. After weeks of missing faces and fog, the idea of a carnival almost sounded like hope. Some said it was a traveling troupe passing through, trying to lift the town's spirits. Others said it was a mistake, a leftover advertisement from another county, but every poster carried the same date, November 10th, 1955. The same week, the church bell rang 13 times. That night, the fairgrounds glowed faintly through the fog. People said they could hear calliope music drifting in from the fields, slow, lilting, slightly off-key. The smell of popcorn and engine grease rolled through the streets. And though no one admitted to going, half the town claimed they saw the Ferris wheel spinning against the dark lights, blinking on and off like the slow turn of a clock. The next morning the fog was heavier than ever. The posters were gone, but the sound lingered. Children walking to school said they heard laughter coming from the woods beyond the tracks, soft at first, then rising, until it cut off mid-breath. The deputy followed the noise to the edge of the old fairgrounds, now nothing but an empty field overrun with frostbitten weeds. But there, in the center, stood a tent, small, striped and still wet with dew. It shouldn't have been there. No one in town owned a tent like that red and white canvas stitched with heavy black thread, the seams uneven, the corners nailed into the frozen ground. The entrance was open just wide enough to show a glimpse of something. Inside, a glimmer, a shimmer, a faint, moving light. He called out, but the echo came from behind him. The air smelled of sugar and rust. The ground squelched under his boots, though the frost hadn't melted anywhere else in town. He reached the flap and lifted it. Inside, there was nothing. No chairs, no stage, no lights, just rows of mirrors lining every wall. In each reflection, the tent looked smaller, darker, the light dimmer, until the final mirror showed only the deputy standing alone, his reflection smiling when he wasn't. He stumbled back, catching his sleeve on one of the nails at the entrance. It sliced through his coat like paper. When he turned to leave, the flap was gone. The mirrors surrounded him on all sides now. Later, when a farmer passed by and found the tent, it was empty, torn, half collapsed into the dirt. But the ground beneath it was flattened a wide circle, smooth as if something heavy had spun there for hours. By evening, the tent had vanished. Only the circle of pressed grass remained, glimmering faintly in the moonlight. That night, the calliope music returned. It played softly through the streets, faint but clear, like a song drifting across water. And though no one could say where it came from, everyone heard it at the same time. The melody ended the same way it had the night before, with a single, drawn-out note that faded slowly, like a breath being held too long. The next morning the posters were back. Only this time the date was different. November 11, second night. And under the printed words scrawled in what looked like charcoal, someone had written, "All acts will return." That night, the fog swallowed the town completely. The power went out, and from the edge of the fields came the faint sound of metal groaning the turn of a Ferris wheel no one could see. Some say, if you drive out past the old fairgrounds when the moon is full, your headlights will catch the glint of something round and moving in the mist. Others say they've heard the faint squeak of gears and the echo of laughter long after the sound should have died. But those who follow it, those who go looking, never find the carnival. The carnival finds them. By late November, Maple Hollow had gone dark. The fog never left, and the power lines hummed like something alive. The night stretched long and shapeless until time itself felt tired. People no longer trusted what they saw after sunset. Not lights, not footsteps, not voices, especially not the lights. That's when the lanterns started appearing. At first, it was just a rumor, a warm, orange glow moving slow through the fog near the riverbank. Old folks said it was a fisherman, one of the missing come back to finish his work. But fishermen don't walk the streets at midnight, and they don't call names as they go. Mrs. Winslow, the night nurse at the clinic, was the first to see him up close. She said she heard knocking on the side door just after 2 in the morning. When she opened it, the hallway filled with cold air, and there he was, standing on the steps. A man in a long coat, shoulders hunched, face shadowed by the brim of a hat. In his hand, he held a brass lantern, old-fashioned, its flame too steady to be wind-blown. He didn't speak at first. He just lifted the lantern and tilted it toward her face, as if studying her features. Then he said, almost kindly, "You look tired. You should come with me." Mrs. Winslow slammed the door. The next day, she told the deputy what she'd seen. He drove to the clinic that night, parked near the back lot, and waited. At 2:03 a.m., he saw it, the light. It bobbed along the road, steady, rhythmic, closer with every sway. The deputy called out, "Who's there?" The lantern stopped. Then the light dipped once, twice, as if nodding. The deputy unholstered his weapon, but before he could move, the fog thickened around him. The light blinked out, then reappeared behind him. He turned fast, flashlight in hand, but the beam only caught empty air. He felt something brush his shoulder, cold, dry, like cloth. Then a voice in his ear, "You shouldn't be out so late." He ran for his car. By morning, the cruiser was found idling at the edge of the river. The deputy wasn't inside. Only his flashlight lay on the seat still on, the beam aimed at the passenger door, where someone had scrawled a message in the fogged glass. "Follow the light." After that, the stories multiplied. People said they saw the lantern moving between houses, pausing at certain doors before drifting on. Some said they heard knocking, soft and deliberate, always 3 times. Others claimed they followed it, that it led them out of town, down to the river, across the bridge that hadn't existed for years. One boy swore he saw the man lift the lantern over the water, and that in its reflection there wasn't one flame, but dozens, faces flickering in the light, each one pale, each one whispering his name. He never slept again after that. Before winter set in, a group of men from the mill went searching. They found lantern glass fragments near the riverbank, scorched black on the inside. The dirt there was strange, smooth, circular, like something had burned hot without smoke. That night, the fog rolled back into town heavier than before. The power lines sparked once, then went silent. And from somewhere near the water came a single, steady glow, not flickering, not wavering, just waiting. Some say the man still walks the roads of Maple Hollow, lantern swinging gently as he goes. When he stops beneath your window, the air grows still, the world holds its breath. If you see his light, don't answer, don't open the door, don't look too long. Because those who do always say the same thing right before they vanish. It wasn't a man holding the lantern, it was the lantern holding him. The churchyard at Street Luke's had always been older than the town itself. The stones leaned like weary men, the names half gone to lichen and time. Behind it, the ground dipped sharply into a small ravine locals called the Hollow, a place where nothing grew right. The grass came in grey, the trees bent toward the center as if bowing to something unseen. For years, folks used it as a dumping ground. Rusted tools, broken headstones, wreaths too faded to keep. The preacher used to say it was consecrated land, that the Lord's light reached every corner. But after the 13th toll of the church bell, no one went near it after dark. Then, that December, the ground began to move. It started with small things, the soil settling in strange patterns, frost melting in perfect circles, even when the air stayed below freezing. The new pastor, young, eager, naive, decided to investigate. He took a shovel, a lantern, and the book of Psalms, and went down into the hollow alone. He never came back. By morning, the snow around the church was covered in footprints, dozens of them leading down the hill and stopping at the hollow's edge. There, in the center, was a hole, perfectly round, too deep for anyone to see the bottom. The snow around it hadn't melted, it had sunk, like something heavy had pressed outward from beneath. The deputy roped it off, said it was an old well. But the next night, the rope snapped, and the hole had widened. The air above it shimmered like heat, though the temperature had dropped below 10. When people stood too close, they said they could hear water running slow, steady, but it didn't sound like any river, it sounded like whispering. By the end of the week, things began to disappear again. Not people, this time objects. The church's silver cross, the altar cloth, the bell rope that had been cut years before. One by one they vanished, and each time the hollow grew deeper. On the 8th night, the caretaker, old Samuel Fitch, left his cabin to check the grounds. He told his wife he'd seen light rising from the hollow, soft gold, like dawn seen through fog. He said it looked beautiful. At sunrise, his coat was found hanging on the cemetery gate. Inside the pocket was a note, written in his careful hand. "They're not coming up, we're going down." After that, the hollow stopped growing. Snow filled the depression, smoothing it into a shallow basin. The wind carried no sound there, not even the whistle through the trees. The town declared the area off limits, but the children still dared each other to run down the hill and touch the frozen ground. Most came back laughing, one didn't. The boy's footprints led halfway across the basin before vanishing. No break in the snow, no hole, no drag marks, just absence. When his mother screamed his name, the snow at the center cracked open for an instant, letting out a hiss of air that smelled like damp stone and candle wax. Then it closed again, leaving the basin perfectly smooth. Now, on nights when the fog drifts down from the river and pools behind the church, you can still see faint shapes moving under the crust of ice. Slow, human shapes pressing upward, reaching, before fading back into the dark. The elders don't talk about it anymore. They just say the hollow isn't empty, it's waiting. And if you ever walk that way after midnight, you'll hear the whisper of soil shifting beneath your boots and a voice thin, almost kind, asking from below, "Ring the bell. We're cold down here." The snow had stopped falling, but the cold didn't leave Maple Hollow. It seeped through the walls, through the cracks in the windows, through the breath of anyone still left in town. Most people had stopped going out after dark. But one man still did, Dr. Isaac Merrin, the town physician, who kept his office light burning long after the streets had gone silent. No one remembered when he'd stopped making house calls. Once upon a time he'd delivered half the babies in town, treated every fever and frostbite that crept through the valley. But now his patients came to him, or rather, were brought to him by the deputy or by family desperate enough to knock on his door past midnight. He never turned anyone away, but few ever came out looking the same. Dr. Merrin lived above his practice on Willow Street, in a building that smelled faintly of iodine and damp paper. Every window was curtained tight, every shade drawn. Only one light ever showed through the frost from his basement window, faint and flickering, like the glow of a lantern under water. The first rumor started when the mailman, tired of delivering unpaid invoices, peeked through the basement window. He said he saw filing cabinets lined from floor to ceiling, their drawers open, filled not with folders but with glass jars. Each jar had a name etched into the side, hundreds of them, and inside each one floated something small, pale, and unrecognizable. The mailman quit that week. Then came the letters. Typed neatly on hospital stationery, unsigned, each envelope addressed to the family of the departed. Inside, a single page with the same message: do not bury the body near water. Do not speak their name aloud after sunset. Do not assume they have stopped listening. The letters arrived to people whose loved ones had been buried years ago. Some had never even been Dr. Merrin's patients, but every letter carried his office return address. When the deputy came knocking, the doctor let him in without protest. The house was warm, too warm, and smelled of something sweet and chemical. In the office, the shelves were stacked with manila folders, each labeled with a date but no names. He flipped one open: medical notes, x-rays, sketches of veins and nerves, except the diagrams weren't human, not entirely. Research, the doctor said quietly. It's all for the research. The deputy asked what kind. The doctor smiled. Preventative medicine. That night, the deputy broke protocol and returned after hours. He found the basement door unlocked, the light still glowing. Inside, the air was heavy with humidity, and the floor was slick with condensation. The filing cabinets were real, so were the jars. And though most were too clouded to see through, some held shapes that looked disturbingly familiar: a hand, an ear, something like an eye pressed against the glass. In the corner stood a metal table covered in open notebooks. The handwriting was dense, looping, erratic. Every page was filled with the same phrase, written over and over: they remember being sick. When the deputy turned to leave, he noticed a small door behind the cabinets, half-sized, bolted shut. From the other side came a sound, slow, muffled, wet, like someone breathing through cloth. He ran. By morning, the doctor was gone. The front door left ajar, the basement light still burning. On his desk sat a single file, thicker than the rest, with no label. Inside were photographs, bodies on examination tables, but not quite dead. Some had their eyes open, some had been moved. At the bottom of the file was a single Polaroid, dated the same week Eddie Price went missing. It showed a boy's hand, small, pale, pressed against glass from the inside of a jar. The photo was warm to the touch. That afternoon, the snow outside the office began to melt, but only on that one patch of street. By nightfall, a faint pulse of light glowed through the frost-covered basement window, rising and falling in rhythm, like the beat of a heart. They say the doctor's house still stands, boarded and silent, the glass in the basement long painted over. But sometimes, when the temperature drops and the fog rolls in from the river, you can still see it, a faint red flicker from beneath the floor, like the glow of a lantern that refuses to die. And if you listen closely, it sounds like a voice whispering through the vents, steady, clinical, patient. You'll feel only a little pressure. By midwinter, the sky over Maple Hollow had gone the color of gunmetal. The air hummed day and night, low and constant, like a cord being held too long. People thought it was the wind, but those who lived near the ridge knew better. They said it came from the old radio tower. The tower had been built after the war, a tall skeletal thing that rose out of the woods east of town. For years, it sent out nothing but music ballads, farm reports, and the morning sermons from Street Luke's. But sometime in late November, the broadcasts changed. At first, it was small things, a static pulse between songs, a faint tapping that kept perfect rhythm with the church bell. Then, one night, every station vanished. The dial went blank, and in their place, a single frequency came alive, 1410 AM. No one remembered ever tuning to it, but the moment you did, you heard the same thing. A voice. Soft, distant, genderless, whispering through the static like it had traveled a long way to get there. "Good evening, Maple Hollow," it said. "We've missed you." Then came the music, not songs anyone recognized, but slow, drawn-out notes played backward, bending and unraveling until the sound turned to something like breathing. After a minute or two, the voice returned. "We're closer than before." The deputy, already frayed from weeks of disappearances, drove out to the tower one night to shut it off. He followed the access road until the forest swallowed the headlights. The closer he got, the louder the static grew, not from the car radio, but from the air itself. It buzzed through his fillings, through his bones. When he reached the clearing, the tower stood against the sky, humming faintly, its red light blinking in uneven rhythm. Snow lay untouched all around it, except for one set of footprints leading to the base and stopping there. The small shack beside it, the relay hut, was unlocked. Inside, the equipment flickered, every gauge needle quivering. The microphone on the desk was still warm, and beside it, a tape reel spun on its own, the film unspooling across the floor. The label read simply, "Broadcast 7." He shut it off. The sound stopped. The air went still. For the first time in months, Maple Hollow went quiet. But when he climbed back into his car, the radio came alive again, even though it wasn't turned on. The voice whispered through the static, "You shouldn't have stopped it." The lights of the tower flared behind him all at once, brilliant white. He turned, shielding his eyes. And in that blinding light, he saw them figures standing along the tree line, hundreds of them, motionless, their outlines humming with the same vibration as the tower itself. Then the lights went dark. By dawn, the deputy's cruiser was found idling at the base of the ridge, doors open, snow falling through the cab. The radio inside played a loop, a single phrase repeating over and over. 1410 AM, all night, every night. After that, the tower went silent again. But people swore they still heard its signal, not from radios, but from within the walls, the pipes, even the fillings in their teeth. The local electricians tore down the lines, but the humming never stopped. Sometimes, when the fog rolls thick over the ridge, a pale red light flickers through the trees where the tower used to stand. And if you stand quiet long enough, you'll hear the air itself speak a soft whisper threading through the hum, the same words caught forever between frequencies. Stay tuned, we're almost here. Winter settled over Maple Hollow like a sheet pulled too tight. The town was half empty now, doors boarded, curtains drawn, snow piling against porches that would never be swept again. The fog no longer came and went, it stayed, clinging to the streets like breath on glass. And somewhere in that haze, people began to whisper about a man who lived by the railroad tracks, a man who made masks. He wasn't new. Folks remembered him vaguely, a quiet figure seen in the corner booth at Penny's Diner years ago, or walking home from the post office with a wooden crate under his arm. No one knew his name. No one ever saw his face. They just called him the Mask Maker. His house sat beside the old freight line, half collapsed, the roof patched with tin and tar paper. No one went near it. The windows were covered with paper brown, oily, translucent when the light hit them right. Through them, people swore they could see movement, slow silhouettes, bent over workbenches, lit by the flicker of a dozen candles. One night, a group of boys dared each other to go see him. They followed the tracks past the last signal light, their boots crunching through the frost. The closer they got, the quieter everything became. Even the crickets stopped. The air smelled of wax and metal shavings. When they reached the porch, the door was already open. Inside, the walls were lined with faces. Dozens of them, hundreds maybe, paper masks hanging from nails and hooks, smiling, frowning, laughing, crying. Some painted in vivid color, others plain and pale as bone. They weren't flat like store-bought masks, they were molded, shaped to fit the contours of real faces. A gramophone played softly in the corner, a warped waltz spinning too slow. The air was warm, thick with the scent of glue and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. The boys didn't stay long. They ran when one of the masks, a child's with blue-painted eyes, turned its head. The next morning, one of the boys, Danny Heller, was gone. His friends swore he'd made it home with them. But when his mother went to wake him, all she found was his bedsheet, folded neatly, and on the pillow a mask. Plain, white, with Danny's freckles painted perfectly in place. The sheriff's deputy searched the mask maker's house that evening. The door was gone this time, ripped clean from its hinges. Inside, the masks were still there, all except one, an empty hook in the center of the wall. The gramophone still played its broken tune. And on the workbench sat an open journal, its pages filled with sketches, faces, names, notes about fit, memory, and preservation. On the last page, one line was written over and over in black ink, until the paper tore. They forget their faces too quickly. I'm only helping them remember. The deputy left everything where it was and locked the door behind him. But by morning, the house had changed. The windows were uncovered, the paper peeled away, and inside the masks were gone. Every single one. For the next week, townsfolk started seeing them not hanging, but worn. Figures in the fog wearing faces that weren't their own. Faces that smiled too wide or blinked out of rhythm. Some swore they saw Danny among them, his paper skin pale under the lantern light, his mouth moving silently beneath a mask of his own. No one ever found the mask maker. His house burned to the ground in the spring thaw, no smoke, no fire, just ash. But on quiet nights, when the train whistle echoes through the valley, you can still smell wax on the wind. And if you wake to find your window fogged from the outside, you might see a face pressed against it, not your reflection, but something close. It will look at you, tilt its head, and whisper softly through the glass. Don't worry, I'll make you one too. By January, Maple Hollow was sealed in ice. The fog had frozen mid-air, turning the whole town into something half-real, as if the world had been paused between breaths. The last of the streetlights flickered behind curtains of frost, and every sound carried too far. Even the crows had stopped calling. That was when the photograph appeared. It showed up first in the window of the old general store, a black and white print, the size of a postcard, pinned neatly to the glass from the inside. No one knew who'd put it there. The store had been closed since the summer. But the picture was clear. A crowd gathered in front of the courthouse. The whole town, it seemed, laughing, waving, bundled in coats. Except the courthouse had burned down years ago, and none of those faces matched anyone still alive. People came to look anyway. They said the picture made them feel warm, nostalgic even. Some swore they could hear faint music when they stared too long a fiddle, maybe, or an organ grinding out a waltz. Then, one by one, the same photograph began to appear elsewhere. On the bulletin board of the diner, behind the church altar, tacked to doors and fences all over town. Always the same image. Always new paper, unwrinkled, unweathered by the snow. The deputy collected a few to burn. But when he laid them on his desk, he noticed something. The people in the crowd had shifted slightly. A man who'd been standing in the back row was now closer to the front. A woman who'd been laughing now stared directly at the camera. He looked closer and froze. At the very edge of the frame stood a small figure, half turned toward him. The child was blurry, but the shape of the coat, the hair, it looked exactly like Eddie Price. That night, he burned the photographs in the station furnace. The flames flared blue, the heat sharp enough to crack the iron. When he woke the next morning, the walls of the office were covered in prints again, hundreds of them curling at the edges like frozen leaves. And now, he was in them. The deputy's own reflection stared back from every photo, standing among the smiling crowd, a grey silhouette near the center. No expression, no eyes, just the outline of his hat and badge. He left town that night, or tried to. On the highway north, the fog thickened until the road disappeared. He stopped the cruiser and got out, trying to find the guardrail. The snow crunched underfoot. Then he saw something half buried in the drift, another photograph, face down. When he turned it over, his own headlights illuminated it. The picture was taken from where he stood, the cruiser, the fog, and himself caught mid-step, looking down. He dropped it and ran back to the car. But when he slammed the door and looked at the passenger seat, the photograph was lying there again. Still warm. He never made it out of Maple Hollow. They found the car idling by the old quarry a week later, radio static humming, windshield frosted from the inside. On the dash sat a Polaroid camera, its film still developing. When they peeled the photo free, it was blank at first. But as the cold air touched it, shapes began to emerge. The courthouse crowd, clearer than before, every face perfectly still. In the front row stood the deputy, smiling faintly now, his eyes dark smudges in the snowlight. Some say those photographs still show up after long winters, tucked between old books or pinned under cracked glass. The people in them never move much, not all at once, but if you set one on a windowsill overnight, it's different by morning. Someone new will be standing there. Someone you know. And behind them, if you look closely enough through the grain and the snow, you can see Maple Hollow itself frozen, waiting, alive, inside the photograph. By the time spring should have come, Maple Hollow had stopped keeping calendars. The fog had outlasted winter, the snow never truly melted, and the town clock still read midnight no matter how many times anyone tried to wind it. The few who remained spoke in whispers, voices too soft to echo. That's when people noticed the widow Mrs. Eliza Harrow walking the streets again. She'd been gone for years. Her husband, Thomas, was one of the first to disappear, a carpenter who had helped rebuild the church steps after the fire. They said he'd found something buried beneath the stones. He never told anyone what it was, only that it hummed when the bell rang. 2 days later he was gone, leaving behind his hammer, his boots, and a single unfinished plank carved with symbols no one could read. Eliza had stayed inside after that, curtains drawn, windows nailed shut, her house slowly sinking into the earth. Some said she'd lost her mind, others said she was waiting for him to come back. But in early March she appeared again, pale, thin, wearing her black mourning coat, walking barefoot through the frost. She went door to door, knocking softly, carrying a small wooden box tied with twine. Those who opened their doors said she spoke gently, like someone half asleep. "It's almost time," she told them. "He found it, and now I have to tell the rest." No one understood what she meant. That evening she came to the deputy's house. He'd returned to town a different man, hollow-eyed, slower to speak, but he still wore the badge. She asked to sit by his fire. He said she could. She placed the box on her lap and began to talk. He was digging under the church steps, she said. Said he'd hit stone, but it wasn't like the others. It was smooth, too smooth. He called me out to see it, but by the time I got there, he'd already opened it. I told him not to. I told him some things aren't meant to breathe air. "What did he open?" the deputy asked. She looked at him with eyes that didn't blink. A door, small at first, then larger. She untied the twine and lifted the lid of the box. Inside lay a handful of dark soil, damp and cold, and buried in it, a fragment of carved wood. It pulsed faintly, like something alive. He said it called to him, she whispered. Said it was older than the church, older than the river. Said it wasn't buried by accident. and when he pulled it free, the ground began to bleed. The deputy leaned closer. The carvings on the fragment looked like letters, but not any he knew, looping shapes that seemed to twist even when still. Beneath the etching, the wood glistened faintly, as though it was sweating in the firelight. After he vanished, she continued, I heard him in the walls, every night at the same time, whispering that I needed to finish what he started. What did he start? Her smile was thin, almost tender. The rebuilding. Then the soil in the box began to shift. The deputy saw it just barely, the grains trembling like insects under glass. A thin thread of blood welled from the center, spreading in a slow spiral across the wood. Eliza didn't flinch. I tried to hide it, she said, but you can't bury something that isn't dead. The deputy stood to call for help, but the air had gone thick, heavy as syrup. When he looked back, she was gone. The chair was empty, the box still sitting on her lap as if she'd never touched it. The fire hissed once, then died. In the morning, his house smelled of earth and iron. On the mantel, the box sat open. The soil inside was dry now, the wood gone. In its place lay a single nail, blackened and warm to the touch. Later that week, townsfolk said they saw Eliza Harrow walking toward the churchyard, her black dress dragging through the mud, her hands empty. She stopped at the hollow behind the church and knelt. Those watching said the ground there began to sink again, folding inward like a breath drawn deep. When they reached her, she was gone, leaving only her footprints and the faint outline of a hand pressed into the mud, fingers pointing downward. Now, when the fog curls low over the churchyard, you can still hear her voice if you listen closely, whispering through the trees, low and urgent, the same phrase over and over. He found the door, but something else found the key. The river that cut through Maple Hollow had always been the town's lifeline. Before the fog, it shimmered blue in the morning and turned black at night, carrying the scent of wet stone and cedar. But by early April, the river had changed. The water ran slower now, thicker somehow, and the color no one could quite describe it. Not green, not brown, but something in between, like rusted glass. It began with the light. At first, it was faint, a shimmer beneath the surface, seen only at dusk. The children said it looked like lanterns drifting underwater. The older folk said it was reflection from the streetlights, though half the lights in town no longer worked. Then, one night, the glow rose higher, burning orange through the fog, pulsing in rhythm like the steady beat of a living thing. The deputy saw it first. He was walking the riverbank, flashlight off, listening to the silence. The air smelled of wet earth and metal, sharp and wrong. As he reached the old bridge, the glow brightened beneath him, illuminating the wooden planks from below. For a moment, he could see his own shadow dancing across the ripples. But there was something else, another shadow, beside his, taller, leaning closer to the surface. He drew his weapon and called out. The river answered. The water bubbled, thick and slow. Then a voice came, not from across the bank, but from below. You buried it too shallow. He stumbled back. The current surged, breaking into waves that slapped against the bridge's supports, and for just a moment, something floated up, a shape half human, half drowned. Its eyes glowed faintly with the same color as the water, and its mouth opened and closed as though repeating a prayer underwater. When the deputy blinked, it was gone. The next morning, the fishermen found the same glow spreading downriver, collecting in eddies and pools. Dead fish rose to the surface, their scales slick with a thin, oily sheen. Some swore the bodies moved, even after being hauled to shore, mouths opening and closing as if whispering. By noon, the entire river glowed. The mayor ordered a town meeting at the schoolhouse, but no one showed except for Mrs. Winslow, the nurse, and the last remaining deacon from Street Luke's. They stood by the window, watching the light ripple through the fog outside. It's not coming from the river, Mrs. Winslow said quietly. It's coming through it. That night, people living near the water couldn't sleep. Their walls pulsed with reflected light, rising and falling like breathing. One family claimed to hear humming beneath the floorboards, soft, steady, like a lullaby through a wall. When they looked out their window, they saw dozens of shapes along the shore. Not people, not quite dark figures kneeling by the edge of the water, their hands submerged, faces turned upward, as though listening to something deep below. In the morning, the figures were gone, but the ground was wet where they'd knelt, the mud imprinted with hundreds of handprints pressed into the earth. Each one pointed toward the current. By the following evening, the glow began to spread into the fields. It seeped into the irrigation ditches, into wells, into the puddles that formed under dripping eaves. The whole town shimmered faintly, like it was lit from underneath. The deacon tried to bless the water, standing knee-deep at the shallows with his Bible open. The glow dimmed around him for a moment, then surged upward, swallowing him whole in a single ripple. The next morning his Bible washed ashore, the pages blank, the leather cover soaked through and soft as flesh. The townsfolk stopped going near the river after that. But sometimes, when the fog was low and the air still, they could see the light shining faintly through the cracks in the bridge, orange, steady, patient. And late at night, when the wind blew downstream, the air would hum again, low, rhythmic, almost kind. If you stood long enough on the bank, you could almost make out words rising with the current, 100 voices speaking as one, murmuring through the dark, carried on the glowing tide. We remember the door. We remember the hands that opened it. By May, the fog had thinned just enough to let sunlight through, but it didn't feel like warmth. It was pale, exhausted light, filtering through grey clouds that never broke. The townspeople, what few were left, decided to hold a parade. They said it would be good for morale, a sign that Maple Hollow could still be alive. The idea came from the mayor, though some swore it wasn't really his idea at all. He'd started speaking differently lately, slower, as if choosing words from a voice that wasn't his own. "We need to celebrate what remains," he told the deputy. "We need to remind the town it still has a heartbeat." And so they planned it. The Spring Revival Parade. Floats built from old truck beds, paper banners hung across Main Street. School children rehearsed songs in the church basement, though none of them ever remembered the lyrics after practice. The town band tuned their instruments in the square, and when they played, the notes sounded just slightly off, like a song heard underwater. The morning of the parade was unnaturally still. The air smelled faintly of river silt and ash. Yet the crowd gathered anyway, faces pale behind their scarves, eyes darting toward the rooftops as if waiting for something else to appear. At noon the drums began. Slow, deliberate. A rhythm that matched the pulse everyone had grown used to hearing in the hum of the wires and the glow of the water. The marching started children in costume, farmers in their Sunday coats, a banner reading, "Maple Hollow still stands." And for a while, it worked. People smiled. They waved. The air almost felt like the past again. Then the trumpets faltered. One long, low note cracked the rhythm, sour and broken. The drummer missed a beat. The flautist stopped mid-breath, eyes wide. From the back of the line came murmurs, confusion at first, then unease. The floats kept moving, but slower now, wheels creaking on the cracked asphalt. One float, a replica of the old church, began to shimmer in the light. Its paper walls rippled like water. The children riding atop it froze, their faces still painted bright and cheerful, though their eyes had gone grey. Then the sound changed. It wasn't music anymore. It was a hum, low, vibrating through the street, the same tone that had haunted every radio, every wire, every dark room since the first disappearance. It rose and fell like breathing, sinking with the footsteps of the crowd. People began to march without realizing it, 1-2, 1-2, their movements stiff, mechanical. Their mouths opened as if to sing, but no words came, only the hum. The deputy shouted for them to stop. No one did. The parade line turned the corner onto Sycamore Lane, where the old Givens house stood silent and waiting. The windows were dark, but as the first float passed, something inside flickered, a shape moving between the curtains. The mayor walked at the front, still carrying the town banner. His lips moved soundlessly, his eyes glassy. The deputy ran to him, grabbed his arm, and felt it, the vibration, faint but constant, running beneath his skin. The banner fell to the ground, its letters already fading as if the ink refused to stay. Then came the silence. It happened all at once. The hum stopped, the drums stopped, even the wind froze mid-breath. The entire parade halted in the street, hundreds of bodies standing still, heads tilted upward toward the pale sky. The deputy called out again. No one answered. He took a step forward, the only sound his boots on the cracked pavement. The crowd didn't move, didn't blink. Then, as he reached the center of the square, every head turned at once, slow, deliberate, toward him. Their eyes were white. For a heartbeat, everything held the town, the air, the world itself, and then, without a sound, the crowd began to walk, not forward, not backward, down. The ground gave way beneath their feet like melting wax. One by one, they sank into the street, vanishing into the earth without a scream, without struggle. Only their reflections remained faint and shimmering, as if the pavement had turned to glass. By sunset, the square was empty. The floats were gone. The instruments lay scattered, strings snapped, drums split clean down the middle. That night, the fog rolled in again. It carried the faint echo of footsteps and music that wasn't there. Drums, horns, the soft laughter of a crowd that no longer existed. Sometimes, on anniversaries of that day, the townsfolk who survived say they hear it again, faint, distant, carried on the wind. The sound of a parade marching just out of sight. And if you follow the music too far, you'll reach the square where the street still dips in the middle, smooth and glassy. Beneath it, if you look long enough, you can see shapes moving, hundreds of them marching endlessly under the surface, keeping perfect time to a song that no one ever learned. The old school on the hill had been shuttered for months after the floors began to bow and the whispers started coming from the vents. The windows were boarded now, the flagpole bare, but some nights people swore they could still see lights flicker in the upper rooms, dim, yellow, like candles moving from desk to desk. No one wanted to go back inside. Not after the janitor vanished, not after the children's drawings reappeared under fresh paint. But when the thaw came in late May, the deputy was sent up the hill to check for trespassers. The lock on the front door was untouched, dust thick on the handles. Still, as he pushed it open, he swore he heard a bell ring down the hall, one long chime, as though class had just begun. The air inside was cold, too cold. His flashlight beam caught floating dust that moved in strange patterns, not drifting but circling, as though drawn to something unseen. The desks were all still there, lined in neat rows, each one with a name scratched into the wood. The smell of chalk and mildew clung to the walls. Then he noticed it. Room 3B. The door was locked from the outside. A chain crossed the handle, sealed with a padlock that wasn't on any maintenance record. The metal looked newer than the rest of the building. On the door itself, someone had drawn a small handprint in white chalk, child-sized. He tried the lock. It rattled once, then froze. From behind the door came a soft sound, not movement, not breathing, a slow, rhythmic tapping. He called out, but his voice came back to him distorted, like an echo recorded on old tape. Still, he tried again. The tapping stopped. Then faintly came another sound, the whisper of a pencil scratching paper. He cut the chain. The door swung open to reveal a classroom untouched by time. The floor was layered in dust, yet every desk was clean, their tops polished to a dull shine. On the blackboard, written in chalk, was a single line, "Homework, don't forget to stay." The deputy stepped inside. The air grew heavier with each step, pressing against his chest. On the teacher's desk lay a notebook, open to a page filled with neat, looping cursive. He read the first line aloud. "Attendance, 24 present, 0 absent." He flipped to the next page, same handwriting, "Attendance, 24 present, 0 absent." Page after page after page, the same line written over and over until the ink grew darker, the letters jagged. Then, a noise from behind him. He turned his flashlight toward the desks. The chairs were filled, now faint outlines seated where there had been none. The air shimmered, and he could smell something iron, chalk dust, and the faint sweetness of apples left too long in a locker. A child's voice whispered, "We stayed." The flashlight flickered. For a heartbeat he saw them rows of children, pale and translucent, eyes black as slate. Each wore a paper mask, some smiling, some frowning, all cracked down the middle. He stumbled backward, tripping over the threshold. When he looked up again, the room was empty. Only the chalkboard remained, the words now smudged into something new. Attendance. 23 present, 1 visitor. He ran. When he returned the next day with help, room 3B was gone. The hallway ended in a solid brick wall, the floorboards smooth as if nothing had ever stood there. But on the far wall, hidden behind years of grime, someone had drawn another chalk handprint, larger this time. The school remains locked to this day. The hill around it has begun to collapse, swallowing the playground and the lower steps. But sometimes on still nights, if you walk the road past the old swing set, you can hear the bell ring once slow and clear. And if you listen after the echo fades, you'll hear the whisper of pencils moving across desks, and a chorus of soft voices counting in unison from inside the locked walls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 24, 25. Summer never really came to Maple Hollow that year. The sky stayed grey, the fields stayed damp, and the trees seemed to lean closer together, as if whispering. The fog didn't lift anymore, it simply thinned by day, then thickened again by night. But everyone noticed when the crow appeared. It came one morning in June, just after dawn. A single black shape perched atop the old-school flagpole, so still that at first people mistook it for a weather vane. Its feathers were glossy, too clean for this town, and its eyes caught the light like shards of coal. The flagpole hadn't held a flag since the parade, since the silence, but now it held that bird, unmoving, watching the square. It didn't caw, didn't stir, it just stayed. By noon, people began to talk. The widow Harrow claimed it wasn't a crow at all, but a messenger, same as in the old stories. The preacher's stand-in, what was left of him, said it was a warning. The mayor, if he was still the mayor, said nothing. On the second day, the crow still hadn't moved. The air around the pole shimmered faintly in the heat that shouldn't have been there. Children dared each other to throw stones at it, but the stones never hit. They turned in midair and fell straight down. One boy swore he heard the crow whisper his name when he turned to run. By the third day, the fog rolled back in from the river, thick and silver white. The bird was still there. But now it wasn't alone. From the steeple of Street Luke's, another crow watched, and another from the courthouse roof. By evening, there were dozens, hundreds, maybe silent black figures perched along every wire, every fence, every eave in town. Not a sound came from them. The only noise was the slow beating of wings whenever one shifted, just enough to make the air feel alive. The next morning, every window in the square was covered in black feathers, pressed flat against the glass, as though something had tried to push its way inside. The postmaster's wife found a circle of them laid neatly on her porch, surrounding a single silver nail. The hardware store clerk found the same thing. So did the teacher who lived near the tracks. Then the clock tower began to chime. No one had wounded it. No one had touched it since the last parade. The sound was low, metallic, wrong. Somehow each note ending just before it should have. Cut off, like breath. Interrupted. The crows lifted all at once, filling the sky in a single sweeping motion, turning the morning into night. They moved in circles over the square, a great black spiral that turned slower and slower until they began to fall. Not drop, fall. Wings still open, bodies limp, drifting downward like ash. They covered the streets, the cars, the rooftops, until every inch of Maple Hollow was feathered in black. The people who dared to step outside said they weren't dead. Their hearts beat faintly, one slow thump at a time. By sunset, the bodies were gone. Only one crow remained, perched again on the flagpole. But now, something hung from its beak, a strip of fabric, faded red, fluttering against the grey. It was the flag, the one that had vanished the day of the parade. The wind caught it, unfurling the cloth. There was no emblem on it now, no stars, no stripes. Just one long black streak running down the middle, the colour of ink or blood, dried too long to tell the difference. That night, the crow finally spoke. Not in sound, but in the ringing of the air itself. The fog pulsed in rhythm with its heartbeat, and for a few seconds, every window in town reflected the same thing, the sky filled with wings. Then the reflection blinked. By morning, the flagpole was empty. But the shadow of the crow remained, burned into the metal, tail to beak, a perfect silhouette that glowed faintly when touched by light. And sometimes, when the wind shifts, people swear they can hear it again, the rustle of feathers above the square, circling slowly, endlessly, as a single voice whispers from nowhere and everywhere at once. You were warned. July came without Sunday. The days bled into one another, a grey pulse beating under a sky that never cleared. Most of Maple Hollow was gone by then, not gone like moved away, but gone the way sound fades after an echo, leaving only the suggestion that it had ever been there. The post office stood empty. The diner window cracked in two. The church bell hadn't rung since the night the crows fell. Only the librarian remained. Her name was Ruth Weaver. She had worked at the Maple Hollow Historical Society for 40 years, and she kept the keys even after the rest of the staff stopped coming. The library was one of the few places that still had light, an old oil lamp she kept burning by habit, its flame steady even when the wind outside screamed. She was cataloguing census books the night she found it. The volume was labelled Cemetery Records, 1,889, 1,954. She'd seen it before, handled it a dozen times, but tonight something was different. The pages had changed. New names had been written in ink so fresh it bled through the paper. At first, she thought it was vandalism until she saw the dates. Every name had the same one, the 7th of July, 1955. Tomorrow. And next to each name, a single note in perfect script, exhumation approved. She ran her finger down the page. Dozens of entries, the sheriff, the doctor, Mrs. Harrow, even the deputy who had vanished by the river. Then, at the bottom, her own. Her stomach went cold. She turned to the last page, the one that should have been blank, and found a single sentence written across it. To be reclassified, residence beneath. That was when she heard the filing cabinet start to rattle. At first, it was subtle, the tremor of drawers shifting against metal. Then the labels began to flutter, as if stirred by wind that wasn't there. Papers slid free and scattered across the floor, spinning in slow circles. Ruth backed toward the door, clutching the ledger to her chest. The air turned dry, heavy with dust. The lamp's flame grew taller, burning blue. From below the floorboards came a soft scraping sound like fingernails against wood. She bolted the door. The sound followed. One of the filing drawers slid open by itself. Inside were old burial permits, hundreds of them, edges yellowed and fraying. But the names were the same as in the ledger, and as she watched, fresh ink began to bloom across the papers, rewriting itself, filling in new entries. Then the room grew colder. She turned slowly, and there they were, faint shapes standing between the stacks, grey and thin as smoke. Not quite people, but imprints, outlines of men and women with blurred faces, their hands clasped in front of them as if waiting for instruction. "Who's there?" she managed to whisper. The figures didn't answer. They only turned toward her in unison. In the silence that followed, the clock on the far wall ticked backward once, twice. Then, softly, the nearest shape spoke. "We are the ones not recorded." Ruth dropped the ledger. The light from the lamp flickered, sputtered, then steadied again. The figures were gone, the papers lay still. Only the sound of the clock remained steady, forward again, as if nothing had happened. She picked up the ledger, intending to burn it, but when she opened to her page, the ink had changed. Her name was gone. In its place was a single entry written in red pencil: Ruth Weaver located. When the deputy came by the next morning, the library was empty. The oil lamp still burned, the ledger still sat open on the desk, and on the floor, written in a circle of chalk, were hundreds of names, all the names that had been in the book. He followed the list to the last one, traced the chalk letters with his finger, and felt that the floor beneath them was soft, too soft, like the ground before a sinkhole gives way. That afternoon, the fog rolled back in from the river, and the graveyard behind Street Luke's began to sink, stone by stone, until the earth swallowed half the markers whole. Now, on still nights, if you stand in the library ruins and open the right drawer, you'll hear the faint rustle of paper turning itself, and if you listen long enough, a whisper will crawl out from between the files. The record is complete. By August, the fog had grown thin enough to see the horizon again, but the horizon didn't look the same. The river bent differently. The hills seemed closer. Some of the trees along the road to Miller's farm had shifted, or multiplied, or simply weren't right. And then the storm came. It started without warning, rolling in from the north with a sound like 1,000 radios turning on at once. There was no lightning, no thunder, only light pale and pulsing, filling the air as if the clouds themselves were alive. The wind came next, tearing through Maple Hollow with such force it peeled the paint off houses and stripped the bark from trees. By the time it reached the town square, every sign in Maple Hollow began to hum. "Welcome to Maple Hollow," the letters read until the wind hit. Then they began to change. The paint ran, blurring the words into something unreadable, something that looked almost like veins. The rain fell in sheets heavy, black, smelling of metal and burnt sugar. It hissed when it touched the ground. People ran for cover, but no matter where they went, the rain followed, seeping through roofs and walls, dripping from ceilings as though the storm wasn't outside at all, but inside. When it finally stopped, the town line was gone. The leaving Maple Hollow sign at the crossroads had vanished. The highway stretched endlessly in both directions, curving into the mist like a ribbon without end. No matter which way people drove, they always ended up back at the square, the diner, the church, the empty post office, repeating like scenery in a film looped too long. That night, the deputy, the last one who still carried a badge, though the badge had rusted black, tried to map what was left. He started from the church and walked outward with a compass and lantern, marking each mile. By the 5th turn, the needle began to spin. By the 7th, he found himself back where he started. He tried again, and again. At dawn, he found something different. A second sign at the edge of town. Same wood, same style. Only this one didn't say, "Welcome to Maple Hollow." It said, "Welcome back." And beneath it, carved into the post, were names, hundreds of them, every person who had ever gone missing. The wood was still wet, the letters freshly cut. By midday, more strange things appeared. Mailboxes duplicated themselves across the street. Houses stood where no houses had been before. The river split into two, each fork flowing in opposite directions. It was as if the town had been copied imperfectly over itself. The people who remained said the air felt wrong, like being underwater. Their voices echoed even in open fields. Clocks no longer agreed on what hour it was. Some said they could see another Maple Hollow shimmering faintly beyond the fog, its buildings dark, its windows filled with shapes that almost matched their own. Then the lightning began, not white, but red, branching upward instead of down. Each flash revealed something above the clouds, a vast circular shadow that turned slowly, as if the storm itself had gears. When the power lines sparked, the whole town lit up. For a moment, every street, every house, every blade of grass glowed with the same dull orange as the river had months before. And then, silence. No thunder, no wind, just the stillness of something that had finished moving. In the morning, the sun rose straight overhead. Though it was barely past 6, the shadows fell in the wrong direction. The highway never returned, neither did the sign. But the old map in the courthouse changed on its own. New ink bleeding through the parchment, roads curling inward toward Maple Hollow instead of away. Now, when travelers pass through the valley, their radios lose signal, their compasses spin. Sometimes they find themselves back on the same road, the same stretch of cracked asphalt where the mile marker should be but isn't. They say there's still a sign standing at the curve, faded wood, splintered edges. If you look too closely, you'll swear it's watching you. And carved beneath the peeling paint, half hidden by moss, is a single phrase. There is no outside anymore. By September, Maple Hollow had gone quiet again, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from peace, but from exhaustion. The fog still hung low, and the streets still curved wrong, but the storms had passed. What remained of the town moved like ghosts through its own reflection, living out habits with no one left to watch, and in the center of it all stood the Harrow house, the one that had burned twice. It was a narrow home on Birch Street, built before the war, with walls of timber blackened from old smoke. The first fire happened in 1938. The night lightning struck the roof during a summer storm. The family rebuilt it. The second fire came 17 years later, the same night the river began to glow. This time, no one rebuilt it. Still, somehow, the house stood charred but upright, windows cracked but unbroken, its door chained shut, though no one had sealed it. The grass around it refused to grow, and the snow there never melted, even in summer. The townsfolk crossed the street to avoid walking past. They said sometimes at dusk they could see light flickering through the broken panes, a warm, golden light, too steady to be fire and too soft to be electric. The deputy, the one who had seen the parade sink into the earth, was the first to step inside after the storm that erased the town line. He claimed he did it out of duty, though he carried no badge anymore. He just wanted to see if the house was finally empty. It wasn't. The moment he broke the chain, a gust of air rushed past him, dry and warm like breath. The smell of smoke lingered, faint but recent, as if the fire had only died hours ago. Inside, the walls were scorched, but the furniture was untouched, a table still set for 4, a kettle blackened on the stove, photographs on the mantel warped by heat but not burned. He noticed something else, ash on the floor in perfect footprints leading from the kitchen to the stairs. He followed them. Each step creaked like a matchstick, the walls shimmered faintly, and when his lantern flickered, he thought he saw motion shadows twisting along the ceiling in shapes that didn't match his own. On the landing hung a single framed photo, untouched by soot. It showed the Harrow family. Father, mother, 2 children. Their faces were pale and grainy, but their eyes were black smudges. At the top of the stairs, the footprints stopped at a closed door. It was the only room not burned. The wood gleamed as though freshly polished. The doorknob was cold enough to frost his palm. When he turned it, he heard something shift on the other side, slow, deliberate, like someone stepping aside to let him in. The room beyond was a child's. The walls were lined with drawings in crayon, stick figures, crooked houses, fire drawn in jagged red lines. Beneath the window sat a small bed. The sheets were perfectly white. On the pillow lay a matchbox. He picked it up. Inside were 4 burnt matches and 1 unused. Scratched into the wood beneath them was a message, written in a child's careful hand: "You can only burn something that's real." He closed the box. The walls exhaled. The wallpaper rippled like skin. Downstairs, the sound of crackling began faint at first, then louder, until the air shimmered with heat that wasn't there. The deputy bolted for the door, but the hallway stretched longer than it should have, the smoke twisting in spirals that bent toward him, whispering in voices made of air. He stumbled out onto the porch just as the flames caught the windows again. They didn't spread like normal fire, they bloomed inward, silent and golden, curling into the walls as though drawn by invisible hands. He turned back once before running. In the glow of the doorway stood a figure small, no taller than a child, its face flickering between ash and light. It lifted its hand, holding the same matchbox. The next morning, the Harrow house was still there, unburned, the chain replaced, the curtains white and clean. But every window was dark, except for one, the child's room upstairs. If you walk past at night, you'll see it, the soft flicker of flame, just enough to cast a moving shadow on the wall. And if you linger too long, the air will grow warm and still, and you'll hear a child's voice from the open window whisper, low and certain, "We'll try again." By late September, the fields around Maple Hollow had grown wild again. The farmers were gone, their barns empty, the fences rusted and sagging under the weight of fog and time. But the corn kept growing tall, colorless stalks that rattled even when the wind was still. It was the only thing in town that seemed alive anymore. The deputy was the first to notice it. Driving the back road one morning, he saw the corn had risen overnight, 7 feet high, maybe more. It shouldn't have been growing at all. The soil was half frozen, and no one had planted seed in years. Yet there it was, stretching from one horizon to the other like a yellow sea. That night, the crying started. It came with the dusk faint at first, like wind caught in the stalks, a long, low wail that rose and fell with the rustling leaves. The sound drifted over the fields, through the town, down to the river. Some said it sounded like a woman, others said it was a child. The widow Harrow swore it spoke her name. No one wanted to go near it. But curiosity always finds someone. A group of men from what was left of the mill brought lanterns and walked out to the field after sundown. The deputy warned them not to. He told them the soil there wasn't right, that it moved underfoot. They laughed, said it was just fog playing tricks. The men disappeared into the rows. The corn swallowed them. Hours passed. The crying stopped. Then, just before dawn, one man stumbled back into town. His clothes were torn, soaked in something thicker than dew. His lantern was gone. When the deputy asked where the others were, the man stared through him and whispered, "They're still listening." The next morning, the corn was taller, 12 feet, maybe more. The sheriff's old radio crackled to life for the first time in months, tuning itself to a single station static, broken by faint voices counting backward, 10, 9, 8. By nightfall, the crying returned. Louder, closer. The deputy drove out to the edge of the field. His headlights caught movement between the stalks, not wind, not animals, figures, dozens of them. They moved in rhythm, swaying with the sound, their shapes bending and straightening in time with each sob. The corn hissed softly, whispering words he almost recognized. He stepped out of the car. The soil squelched under his boots, damp and warm. The crying turned sharp, almost human now. "Who's there?" he shouted. The sound stopped. Then the corn answered. The nearest stalk split down the middle, peeling open like wet paper. Inside, he saw something pale and wet, a face pressed against the fibers, eyes closed, mouth moving, as though still trying to cry. He stumbled back. The face wasn't old or new. It looked exactly like one of the missing mill workers. The rows began to shift, rippling outward as though hundreds of bodies were buried just beneath the surface, pushing to get free. The air stank of rot and sweet sap. Somewhere deep within the rows, the crying rose again, not one voice this time, but dozens. He ran. When he reached the road, the sound faded, replaced by the rustle of leaves and the hiss of the wind. But when he looked back, the corn moved without wind, bending toward him in a single wave as though bowing farewell. By morning, the field was empty again. The corn still stood, tall and silent. The footprints were gone. Only the soil remained, disturbed long lines spiraling inward toward the center, where the sound had been loudest. That night the fog rolled back, thick and gold in the moonlight, and for a few moments the crying began again, soft and steady. It wasn't coming from the field this time. It was coming from beneath the road. The next day, the deputy found one last thing: a single cornstalk growing through the cracks in the asphalt outside the churchyard. It was slick with dew, though the air had gone dry. Hanging from its tip was something small, a torn scrap of paper, browned and brittle. He unfolded it carefully. One sentence scrawled in pencil: "They didn't plant us." And just beneath the words, a fingerprint pressed in sap, still wet, shaped like a tear. The deputy hadn't slept in weeks. Maple Hollow was no longer a town, it was a labyrinth, folding in on itself, repeating the same streets, the same houses, the same hollow silences. He'd started keeping his notes in 3 different notebooks, because by morning the words he'd written the night before were always gone, erased, sometimes rewritten in a hand that wasn't his. He stopped trusting clocks, he stopped trusting mirrors, but he still trusted the car. The engine was old, stubborn, real in a way nothing else was anymore, so every night he drove. He began with the road that circled the cornfields, where the crying had gone quiet. Then he moved outward, marking turns on the map, counting telephone poles, measuring time by the hum of the tires. Each lap brought him back to the same intersection, the one near the river where the bridge should have been. One night, the fog cleared just enough for him to see something new, faint tire tracks leading off the asphalt, cutting across the field toward the forest. He couldn't remember them being there before. The tracks were perfect circles, looping over themselves again and again until they disappeared into the trees. He followed. The ground grew softer, the car wheels slipping on the damp soil. The headlights caught glimpses of the corn still standing even this far from the farms, its stalks moving though there was no wind. The radio turned itself on. Static, then a voice, low and steady: "Don't stop." The deputy gripped the wheel tighter. The tracks led to a clearing. He braked, stepped out, flashlight cutting through the mist, and froze. The trees around the clearing were carved. Not words, not names, but symbols, spirals, circles, and handprints pressed deep into the bark. The ground beneath his boots was bare earth, smoothed into a perfect ring. In the center lay a single object: his own notebook. It was open. The pages fluttered as though turned by an unseen breeze. He bent to pick it up. The words inside were his handwriting, but not his notes. "Stop driving, you'll find the wheel soon enough." He flipped another page. "The road isn't a road anymore, it's memory." Then, scrawled across the last page in larger, uneven letters: "We turned too many times." He felt the earth shift beneath him. The ring of dirt began to vibrate, faintly at first, then stronger, pulsing like a heartbeat. His flashlight beam trembled. The air hummed. From the trees came a sound, not wind, not whispers, but the rhythmic creak of tires turning slowly, endlessly, in mud. The deputy staggered backward. His boot caught on something buried just beneath the soil. He knelt, brushing away dirt until he found metal, a tire rim. Another beside it, then another. Half a dozen, half sunk, forming a perfect circle around the clearing, each one engraved with names. He wiped the nearest rim clean. His name was there. So was the sheriff's. So was Eddie Price's. Something moved behind him, soft footsteps. He turned the flashlight and saw the figure standing between the trees. It wore his coat, his hat. The beam caught its face for only an instant, but that was enough. It was his own face, pale and hollow-eyed, mouth twitching as if trying to form words. He dropped the light. The beams spun across the clearing, striking the rims. For a moment they all gleamed at once, burning bright, spinning like the edges of a wheel catching fire. Then came the noise. A deep, grinding roar that rose from the earth itself, circling faster and faster until the ground blurred. The trees tilted inward, bending toward the center of the clearing. He fell to his knees, clutching his ears. The roar was deafening, but beneath it he heard a voice, his own voice, whispering through the static. "We drove in circles because there was never anywhere else to go." The next morning, his car was found idling at the edge of the woods, the door hung open, the headlights still pointed toward the field. In the dirt beside the tire tracks was a single circle burned into the ground. No footprints, no body, just his notebook lying open to the last page. The words had changed again. One road left, keep turning. And beneath it, drawn in his own hand, was a perfect spiral ink smudged at the center, as if someone had pressed their finger down hard to stop the motion, if only for a moment. Now, on clear nights, drivers say the fog near the woods never settles. Headlights bend there, curving in wide arcs before vanishing into nothing. If you follow them long enough, you'll find the same clearing, untouched, silent, tire rims half buried in the dirt. And sometimes, when the wind dies, you'll hear an engine start in the distance, one long reverend, then another, then silence broken by a single whisper from the fog. Still turning, October came again, though it felt like the same one that had never really ended. The fog thickened until it seemed the sky had fallen to the ground. Houses stood like tombstones in its quiet, pale outlines of the lives they once held. You could walk down any street in Maple Hollow and swear you were being followed, but when you turned, there was only the sound of your own breathing. That's when they started hearing the knocking. Soft, steady, always in threes. Sometimes it came from the walls, sometimes from the floors, but most often it came from the basements, from the doors that everyone had long since locked. It began at the schoolteacher's house. The widow Simmons had boarded her basement years ago after her husband went missing during the storm that erased the town line. But one morning she found the boards pried loose and her doormat soaked with mud. The nails were bent outward, as though something inside had been trying to get out. She told the deputy, or what passed for one, now. He promised to look after sundown, but by evening the widow was gone. Her front door stood open, and from the top of the stairs drifted a faint humming sound, like a child singing to themselves in the dark. The deputy went down alone. The air grew colder with every step, thick with damp and the faint scent of burnt wood. His lantern flame bent sideways, as if drawn by breath. The steps creaked underfoot, though they looked solid enough. When he reached the bottom, the song stopped. "Mrs. Simmons?" he called. Something moved in the corner. The beam of his lantern caught a shape crouched by the far wall. For a moment it looked like a pile of clothes, until it breathed. The sound was slow and deep, like lungs filling with mud. Then it turned toward him. It wasn't Mrs. Simmons. The thing wore her dress, but the skin beneath was wrong, too pale, too smooth, like wax softening near a flame. The face was hers, almost, but the eyes were gone, replaced by two black holes that shimmered faintly, reflecting the lantern's light like glass. "Not her," it said, in a voice that scraped like broken phonograph static. "She opened the wrong door." The deputy stumbled backward, hand on his revolver. "What door?" The thing tilted its head, its mouth split wider than it should have, stretching from ear to ear. "Yours." He fired once. The gunshot echoed through the floorboards, rattling the windows upstairs. When he looked again, the thing was gone. Only the wall remained, and on it, faintly glowing through the dust, a rectangle drawn in chalk, a door. He climbed out, shaking, slammed the real basement door shut, and nailed it fast. But the sound didn't stop. That night, every basement in Maple Hollow began to knock, one by one. Some folks tried to drown it out with radios. Others dragged furniture over their doors, but the knocking grew louder, more insistent. And then came the voices. Faint, muffled, whispering from behind the wood. "Let us finish what you started." By morning, half the town was gone. The doors hung open, leading only to darkness and the smell of soil. The deputy drove from house to house, but each basement was the same stairs, ending in a wall where the floor should have been. Handprints pressed into the wood, long and narrow, as though the fingers were reaching from the other side. He sealed his own door that night, poured cement over it, set his chair on top, sat there till dawn, revolver in hand, waiting. The knocking came anyway. It was softer this time, closer. He leaned forward, listening. For a moment he thought he heard his own voice, distorted by the wood, whispering from beneath the floorboards. "You shouldn't have closed it." The next morning, the cement was cracked, split straight down the middle. The chair was overturned. The deputy was gone. Now, if you walk the streets of Maple Hollow on a cold October night, you can still hear it, a faint knocking echoing underfoot. 3 slow raps. A pause. Then 3 again. The sound moves, house to house, door to door, as though searching for one that hasn't been sealed. And if you listen too long, you'll hear what comes after the click of a latch, the whisper of hinges, and a voice rising from below, calm and patient. Finally, it happened on a Tuesday. No one in Maple Hollow remembered what date it was anymore. Calendars had stopped making sense, but everyone agreed on the night itself. The town had been holding its breath for weeks, the fog pressed low and the air tight as glass. It was as if the world had grown too tired to keep moving. The stillness began around dusk. The wind, which had never truly stopped since the first storm years ago, simply quit. The trees stood frozen mid-sway. The river went flat and silent, its glow fading to black. Even the insects, those few stubborn crickets that still sang by habit, fell quiet all at once, leaving behind a silence so complete it made the ears ring. In the deputy's office, the clock froze at 11:59. The second hand trembled, then stopped just before midnight. He tapped it once. Nothing. Then the radio came on by itself, whispering through the static, "Don't blink." Across town, the Widow Harrow's porch light flickered 3 times, then stayed on. She thought it was the power lines again, until she noticed the candle flames inside her house had stopped flickering. 2, frozen mid-motion, little tongues of light bent sideways and still, and then came the darkness. Not the usual kind, not night, not shadow. This darkness fell, like something tangible, heavy enough to feel pressing on skin. It swallowed the horizon first, rolling in from every direction until there was nothing left but black. The streetlights didn't go out, they simply disappeared. The buildings disappeared, the stars, the fog, everything. For a few seconds or hours, time didn't exist in that dark. The world was gone. People later said they could hear things moving in it. Slow, careful, breathing close, but never touching. Some said it sounded like whispers brushing past their ears. Others heard nothing at all, only their own heartbeat, loud and wrong, like it was coming from somewhere outside their body. Then, just as suddenly, the darkness lifted. The fog returned, thicker than before. The streetlights flickered back to life, one by one, but something was different. The clocks were wrong, all of them. Every watch, every wall clock, every broken alarm that hadn't ticked in years, they all read the same time, 12. Midnight, forever. The deputy walked outside, lantern in hand, and found the air dead still. No birds, no wind. The snow that had been falling earlier was suspended mid-air, flakes hanging motionless like ash in amber. He touched one. It didn't melt. It didn't move. Down the street, the diner's neon sign blinked back on. Inside, the tables were full again, cups half empty, chairs pulled out, but the people were still. Frozen mid-gesture, mid-sentence. A fork hanging inches from a man's mouth, a hand suspended above a sugar jar. He called out. No one answered. He stepped closer to one of them. Dottie Graves, the waitress. Her eyes followed him. Just her eyes. The rest of her body stayed perfectly still. Her pupils dilated slowly, tracking him as he moved. Then her lips parted. No sound came out, only air, cold as the river. Across the street, the church bell rang once, a single note. The sound was wrong, stretched thin, echoing far too long. The bell tolled again, slower this time, and with each toll the lights around town dimmed. The deputy dropped his lantern and ran for his car, but when he reached it, the The engine was already idling. The headlights pointed down the road that shouldn't have existed, the one that curved out toward the forest, glowing faintly as though lit from below. He climbed in. The dashboard clock read 12. The radio hummed. "You're right on time," said the voice. He put his hands on the wheel. The fog outside pulsed once, like a heartbeat. Then everything went white. When the light faded, the car was gone. So was the deputy. So was half the town. Now, Maple Hollow lies still, most nights, streets empty, lamps burning without heat, clocks frozen on the same hour. Sometimes travelers passing through claim to see headlights down the old road, a single car moving slowly through the fog before vanishing again. And when the wind is just right, the first breath before a storm, you can hear it, a faint tolling in the distance, counting the seconds of a minute that never ends. 1, 2, 3, still midnight. By the time the sun dared to rise again, Maple Hollow was quiet, too quiet, even for a town that had forgotten how to breathe. The fog had settled so low it seemed to seep from the soil itself, coiling around the gravestones behind street lukes like smoke from a slow fire. The snow had crusted over, glinting dull and grey, and every footprint from the day before had vanished. The caretaker was the first to see it. He was one of the last who still kept to a routine. Every morning he walked the cemetery's rows with his lantern, checking for vandals, clearing fallen branches, whispering names to the stones as he passed. He said it kept them calm. But that morning there was one stone too many. It stood near the back fence, where the ground had always been bare clay. A mound of freshly turned earth rose beneath it, smooth and dark as coffee grounds. The stone itself was clean, white marble, new, flawless, shining faintly, though there was no Sunday. No chisel marks, no flowers, no name. Just a single date carved shallowly near the base, October 31, no year, no birth. The caretaker stared for a long time. He was certain it hadn't been there yesterday. He would have noticed. He reached out to touch the carving. The surface was warm. He stumbled back, dropped his lantern, and when he looked up again, something else had changed. The other graves around him seemed closer, tilted slightly inward, as though they were leaning to look. That night, he told the deputy. Together they returned, the fog curling around their boots, breath silvering in the air. The caretaker's hands shook as he raised his lantern. The grave still stood, perfect as before, but now the earth looked unsettled, pulsing faintly, as if breathing beneath the frost. The deputy knelt, brushed aside snow, and found something sticking out of the dirt, a piece of paper, folded tight, edges damp and blackened. He unfolded it carefully. One line, written in shaky pencil. "It's for the one still walking." "Whose handwriting?" he asked. The caretaker didn't answer. He was staring at the stone. His lips moved, forming a word he couldn't say aloud. Then, without warning, the lantern flickered. The light caught the marble, and for an instant there was something there, a faint reflection, like a face pressed against the inside of the stone. They both saw it, eyes closed, mouth slightly open. The deputy reached for his revolver, though he couldn't have said why. The caretaker stepped forward instead. "Maybe it's meant for him," he whispered, voice cracking. "Maybe it's already his." The deputy turned to stop him, but the caretaker had already dropped to his knees and begun to dig, his bare hands clawing through the frozen soil. "Stop," the deputy said, but the man didn't stop. The earth gave easily, too easily, soft, as if it had never frozen at all. Then the caretaker screamed. He pulled back, his fingers slick with something dark. Where he'd touched the soil, the ground had gone black, not blood, not mud, but something thicker, like ink. It spread outward in circles, soaking through his trousers, creeping up his arms. He stumbled away, and the grave shuddered once, as if exhaling. The deputy grabbed him, hauled him toward the gate, and didn't stop running until they reached the church steps. When they looked back, the fog was rising again, swirling low around the graves. The new stone stood alone now, faintly glowing in the dark. By morning, the caretaker was gone. His boots were still on the porch, caked with black mud. The deputy returned to the cemetery alone. The grave was different again. His lantern light showed a new carving where the blank marble had been. A name. His own. He dropped the lantern and ran. It shattered, flames licking through the frost, but the stone didn't crack. The letters only shone brighter in the flickering light. That night, the bell at Street Luke's rang once low and hollow, and somewhere beneath the sound came the faint scrape of stone shifting against soil. No one tends the cemetery now, but travelers say there's still a fresh grave near the back fence. No name during the day, only that single date. But if you pass after midnight, the letters glow faintly through the mist. Yours. No one remembered calling it. No flyers, no phone tree, no knock on doors. Yet when the fog cleared on the first Thursday of November, every remaining light in Maple Hollow glowed at once. House lamps, porch bulbs, even the long-dead street lights humming alive with that dull orange river glow. At exactly 7, the church bell tolled once. People came, not because they wanted to, but because something in the air told them to. They drifted toward the town hall like sleepwalkers, the widow Harrow with her black shawl drawn tight, the schoolteacher who no longer spoke above a whisper, the grocer whose hand still trembled from the knocking in his basement. The deputy came too, lantern in hand, the reflection of his own name still burning behind his eyes. Inside, the hall looked almost untouched. The long tables stood ready, chairs neatly arranged. A faint hum filled the rafters, not electricity, but something softer, like the echo of a distant choir. The mayor was already there. He hadn't been seen since the parade, yet now he stood at the front of the room, pale, smiling faintly, a sheaf of papers clutched in his hands. "Thank you for coming," he said. His voice was calm, too calm, like someone reading from a memory. "We have things to discuss before it's time." No one asked time for what. They simply, Saturday. The mayor began to read. Names, one after another. The old, the young, the missing. Each name hung in the air a moment longer than it should have, echoing faintly as though the walls were repeating them. When he reached the end of the list, he looked up. "Present," he said. And from the shadows at the back of the hall, a second voice, or many voices layered together, whispered back, "Present." The light flickered. The deputy stood. "What is this?" The mayor didn't answer. He only turned the last page. Written, there was a single sentence, scrawled in black ink that hadn't dried. "Roll call complete." Then the floorboards began to creak. Slow, deliberate. Footsteps that didn't belong to anyone seated. One by one, the townspeople turned toward the back of the hall. Figures were gathering there, thin, grey shapes, outlines more than people. Each one stood behind its living counterpart, mirroring their movements perfectly. Mrs. Harrow whispered, "We're still in the record." The mayor smiled wider, though his eyes were black now, glassy and endless. "It's time to reconcile," he said. "We've been overcounted." The lantern light dimmed, the windows clouded with frost from the inside. When the deputy reached for his revolver, the cold metal burned his hand. And then the lights went out. No scream, no struggle, only the sound of paper rustling, hundreds of pages turning at once, as though the entire building had become a ledger reading itself aloud. When the glow returned, the hall was empty. The chairs stood in perfect rows, the floor swept clean. The mayor's papers lay on the podium, blank now except for one faint watermark that read, "Attendance, balanced." Outside, the fog had thickened again, wrapping the church, the library, the empty diner in the same dull hush. The deputy's lantern burned alone on the steps. Its flame was steady, but its light cast no shadow. The next morning, travelers passing through Maple Hollow found the town hall doors wide open. Inside, every chair was filled not with people, but with silhouettes burned into the wood. And if you walk past at night, You can still hear the meeting continuing, soft voices murmuring, pages turning, a gavel tapping once every few minutes. They say the last thing you hear before the doors close on their own is the mayor's voice, calm as ever. All in favor? A long pause. Then, a whisper that fills the air like breath against glass. Aye, when October returned, it didn't arrive slowly the way seasons do. It came in a single night, cold, absolute, and smelling faintly of smoke. The air grew heavy again, the color draining from the trees until even the leaves looked like they'd given up. No one knew what year it was anymore, or if years still passed in Maple Hollow at all. What few townsfolk remained had stopped marking calendars. The days were measured by fog and silence, and now both had returned in full. The deputy's office stood empty. The church doors had frozen shut. The diner window showed faint handprints on the inside, though no one had been there for months. And yet, on the morning of the 31st, every porch in town bore a pumpkin. No one had carved them, no one remembered setting them out. But there they sat, fat, perfect, and glowing softly from within, even though there were no candles inside. The fog that day didn't burn away with the Sunday. It just grew brighter. Around noon, a faint music drifted through the streets, the sound of children singing somewhere far away, their voices thin and metallic, like a record played underwater. The tune was one everyone knew, "Trick or treat, smell my feet," but no footsteps followed. By evening, the pumpkin's glow had turned orange-red, pulsing faintly in rhythm with the church bell's toll. 13 times again, though the bell tower had collapsed the year before. At the edge of town, the road that led nowhere flickered with headlights, not one pair, but dozens, cars moving slowly through the fog, circling the square. The horns didn't honk. The engines didn't hum. They simply rolled by, their windows blacked out. At 9 p.m., the radios came alive all at once. Every house, every diner booth, every abandoned patrol car static first, then a voice, calm, familiar. "Happy Halloween, Maple Hollow," it said. "We've been waiting to finish the count." The fog grew thick enough to taste. The air shimmered orange, as though the pumpkins themselves were breathing. The widow Harrow, standing at her window, watched as figures began to move through the mist, children in costumes, hundreds of them, paper masks gleaming in the light. Cowboys, devils, ghosts, ballerinas. Their movements were too smooth, their laughter too steady. They knocked on doors, and though no one lived behind them anymore, the doors opened anyway. Each child reached into the doorway and pulled something out, not candy, not treats, but small shapes wrapped in paper, glistening wet. They dropped them into their sacks and moved on. The widow swore she heard one of them whisper, "Thank you." Down the street, the church bell tolled again, slow, dragging, each note echoing longer than it should have. The fog began to rise higher, climbing the buildings, swallowing the rooftops. From somewhere above, a light flashed once, then twice, as if signaling. Then everything went still. The singing stopped. The fog stopped moving. Even the pumpkins stopped glowing. In the silence that followed, a single car door slammed, then another, then dozens more. When the morning came, the town square was empty. No fog, no pumpkins, no sound, just perfect, untouched stillness. The only sign of anything having happened was in the road, small round stains shaped like wet handprints, leading away from every porch and converging toward the center of town. There, in front of the courthouse steps, lay one final jack-o'-lantern. Its grin was crooked, its candle cold. Carved into its side were words so thin they looked scratched by fingernails. All souls counted. That night, the wind returned for the first time in months. It carried the faint scent of sugar and smoke, the echo of laughter that didn't belong to anyone living. And sometimes, when the fog rolls down again from the ridge, travelers say the pumpkins come back one by one, flickering along Maple Street like lanterns marking the way home. If you follow them too far, the air grows warm, and the wind carries voices just beyond hearing the sound of children still walking, bags rustling, repeating the same phrase in perfect, patient rhythm. Trick or treat, trick or treat, trick. By the time the fog finally broke, Maple Hollow was gone. Not burned, not buried, just missing. The valley still lay where the map said it should, and the road still wound down toward the river bend. But travelers who passed through swore they felt a weight in the air, the way a room feels after someone leaves it, when their absence still presses against the walls. Grass grew over the sidewalks, and what had once been houses were now hollow frames, blackened timbers filled with dust. The church bell tower leaned toward the river, its mouth sealed shut. The water below glowed faintly at night, pulsing with the slow rhythm of something breathing in its sleep. No one could say exactly when the town vanished, only that it didn't all happen at once. First the people, then the sound, then even the sky above it, until only silence remained. And beneath that silence, a hum, the same hum that had been there from the start. Long after the storm, after the parade, after the last Halloween, the hum persisted, low, steady, patient. Sometimes you could feel it through the ground, thrumming like a heartbeat. Sometimes it spoke, though never in words. It whispered through the wires that no longer carried power, through the radio static that still haunted the empty roads. It remembers. The deputy's cruiser was the last thing anyone found. It sat on the hill above the square, engine cold, headlights still pointed toward the ruins of town. The clock on the dash read 12. Inside, the notebook lay open. The final page was blank, except for 3 faint lines pressed into the paper, as if written without ink. We counted. We buried. We stayed. At night, when the moon hangs low over the valley, the fog rolls back for a few hours. That's when people say you can see them shapes walking the old streets, flickering like candlelight behind broken glass. Sometimes they move toward you. Sometimes they're only watching. If you stop your car and listen, you'll hear footsteps on the pavement and the faint rattle of paper masks in the wind. Then, faintly, the sound of a bell not ringing, but breathing. The few who've stood there long enough to watch say the town seems to wake for a moment. Lights glow in windows where no power runs. Shadows cross streets that don't exist anymore. And just before the fog folds back over everything, you can hear them voices whispering in the same rhythm as the hum beneath your feet. It never slept. It never ended. We are still here. Then the fog closes, the road straightens, and Maple Hollow is gone again, leaving only the sound of the wind, faint and uneasy, passing through the valley like breath through a sleeping chest. And if you listen too closely as you drive away, the static on your radio will rise for just a second, enough for a single phrase to slip through, so quiet you might think you imagined it. Turn back. We've been waiting,